There is a sound in the abandoned mines of the Arizona desert that the old miners had a rule about. You never answer it. 3 taps in the dark, a pause, and 3 taps again, rising up out of shafts that drop 400 feet into black water that has never seen the sun. They called the things that made it the knockers. Some men thought they were friendly. The men who walled off the lower drifts in 1941 and lied about why did not think so. Before I take you down into the dark with me, do one thing while it is still quiet. Tap that like button and subscribe to the channel, because the deeper we go into this story, the less either of us is going to want to look away. Do it now, while you still can. When a young treasure hunter chasing a lost silver vein walks into that district alone and vanishes down the deepest shaft on the monument, a backcountry ranger and his team have 3 days, a missing man who may already be dead, and a voice rising out of the dark that begs for help in a tone you cannot quite trust. Because the thing in the deep does not come up into the sun. It does not have to. It learns the rhythm of you. It learns the voice you cannot leave behind, and then it asks you to come down. This is the account of what answered from the bottom of the number 6, what came up the rescue rope behind a dying man, and the one rule that is the only thing standing between you and the dark. So turn off the lights, put your headphones on, and remember the rule, because by the end of this you are going to feel the urge to break it yourself. Do not answer it. There is a rule on the monument that is not written in any handbook. You do not answer the knocking. You hear it down in the old shafts, 3 taps and a pause. 3 taps and a pause, and the thing inside you wants to tap back. You must not. I learned that rule too late, and a good man is gone because of it. I am going to tell this the way it happened, in order, because if I skip ahead I will lose my nerve and stop. My name does not matter much for the start of this. What matters is that for most of my life I worked in a city, behind glass, under fluorescent light, in a job that slowly turned me into someone I did not recognize. When the company closed the regional office, they gave me a thin envelope and a handshake, and I drove home that night with the windows down and felt something I had not felt in years. I felt nothing pulling on me. No meetings, no badge that beeped a door open. Just the road. I had grown up spending summers with my uncle outside Aisho, in the low Sonoran country in southern Arizona, where the saguaros stand on the ridges like men counting the dead. He had worked the copper operations when they were still running, and after the mines closed he stayed because the desert had its hooks in him. He used to say the desert did not want you, but it would keep you anyway. He died the winter before I lost my job, so when I saw the seasonal posting for a backcountry ranger position on a desert national monument, in country I half knew, it felt less like a choice and more like a tide. I want to be honest about why I took it. Part of it was the love of that land, the smell of creosote after rain, the way the light goes copper and then violet at the end of the day. Part of it was money, because seasonal federal work is steady enough and the housing is provided. And part of it was that I wanted to be somewhere a phone could not reach me. I wanted to be a person who walked all day and slept hard and did not think about the man behind the glass. I did not understand yet that the desert keeps more than people. It keeps what people leave behind. And some of what it keeps was never meant to come back up. The monument sits in a stretch of Sonoran lowland broken by 3 small mountain ranges, all of them shot through with old mine works from the copper and silver booms of the last century. The land is federal now, protected, but the human history is still bolted into the rock. There are head frames leaning over collapsed shafts. There are adits, which are the horizontal tunnels driven straight into a hillside, their mouths boarded and signed and fenced. There are vertical shafts that drop straight down into black water. The whole district is closed to the public. There are signs every few hundred feet. Danger, abandoned mine, unstable ground, stay out, stay alive. People ignore them constantly because people are people. I reported in May, which in that country is the wrong month to arrive. The heat was already cruel. By 10 in the morning, the air came off the flats like the open door of an oven. My supervisor was a district ranger named Hollis Reyes, a lean man in his late 50s with a gray mustache and the unhurried way of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything. He kept a flat toothpick at the corner of his mouth at all times, even on the radio, and he had 18 months left until retirement and made no secret of wanting to reach it clean. No incidents, no fatalities, no paperwork that would follow him into the rest of his life. He told me that on my first day plainly. like a weather report. I have buried 2 seasonals and 1 visitor in my career, Reyes said. I am done burying people, so you will follow procedure, you will check in when you are supposed to check in, and you will not be a hero. Heroes are how I end up writing letters to mothers. I told him I was not the hero type. I believed it when I said it. There were not many of us. Most of the staff worked the visitor center and the front country campgrounds near the highway. Backcountry was thin. My main partner on patrol was another seasonal named Dale Brunner. A heavy-set, sunburned, relentlessly cheerful man of about 30 who never stopped talking and never once said anything cruel. Dale had a wife and a 4-year-old daughter back in Tucson, and a permanent position was the only thing he wanted in the world. He had applied 3 years running, he carried a laminated photo of his kid in his chest pocket, and he showed it to anyone who slowed down long enough. His goal was simple and human. He wanted to be made permanent, get the benefits, and stop being afraid that one bad season would put his family on the street. I liked him immediately, which made everything that came later worse. Dispatch was run out of the visitor center by a woman named Ruth Sandoval, who had worked that monument for 22 years and knew the radio dead zones better than the people who mapped them. Ruth was dry as the playa and chain smoked outside the back door between calls. She kept everyone accounted for the way a shepherd keeps sheep, by counting constantly and trusting no one to stay where they were put. Her voice on the radio was the most reassuring sound on the monument, and toward the end it was the only voice I could be sure was hers. The work itself, in those first weeks, was good. Honest, hard, and good. I patrolled trails and washes, checked permits, hauled out trash that visitors left at the springs, monitored the water sources, and logged wildlife. I learned the country. I learned which washes flash flooded in the monsoon and which would not. I learned to read the topographic maps until the contour lines became hills behind my eyes. I learned to carry more water than I thought I could ever drink, because in that heat a person can die in an afternoon, and several have. I checked in with Ruth on the radio at set intervals, and when I was out of range I logged my position in the patrol book at whichever cabin I reached. I should tell you about the cabins, because they matter later. The monument maintains a handful of old patrol cabins in the backcountry. Plain block and timber structures with a cot, a propane stove, a water cache, and a logbook. The logbooks are not just for rangers. Over the decades, surveyors, biologists, mineral assessors, and border patrol agents had all written in them. They are a strange, layered record, decades deep, of everyone who ever spent a night alone in that country. I read them the way some people read scripture, late at night, by lamplight, when sleep would not come. It was in the logbook at the quartz tank cabin, on my 3rd week, that I first saw it. Not a story, not a warning, just a line, in faded pencil, undated, in a careful hand. Heard the tapping again from the vulture audit. 3 and 3. Did not answer this time. ECC. I read it twice. Then I turned the page and read about a biologist counting bats, and I forgot about it. I want to be very clear that at this point I was not afraid of anything. I was a tired man who had found a life that fit him, and I was grateful, and the desert was beautiful, and the worst thing I had dealt with was a dehydrated tourist and a flat tire on the patrol truck. I am going to ask you for one small thing before I take you any further, because what comes next is the part I have trouble saying out loud. If this account is holding you, if you want to know what happened in the Vulture District and why a man named Garrett Voss never came home, please take a second to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps these stories reach the people who need to hear them, and it costs you nothing but a moment. Do that now, while it is quiet, because once I start the next part, I do not think either of us is going to want to stop. The heat broke a little in the first week of June. Not in temperature, but in the sky. The monsoon was coming. You can feel it in that country before you can see it. A heaviness. A faint smell of wet stone carried on a wind that has not found its rain yet. The old-timers say the desert wakes up when the monsoon comes. I did not know yet how literally some of them meant that. The first knocking I heard, I explained away. That is what a reasonable person does. And I want you to know I was reasonable, right up until being reasonable stopped helping me. It was a Tuesday in early June, near the end of a long patrol day. I had driven the truck as far as the road allowed into the Vulture District, the most heavily mined of the 3 ranges, and then walked a closed road on foot to check the fencing around a cluster of old works. The Vulture had been a silver operation, then a copper one, then nothing. The hillsides there are scarred with adits and prospect holes, and the largest feature is a deep vertical shaft the old maps simply call the number 6. It drops by the survey notes more than 400 feet, and the bottom 100 feet are flooded with groundwater the color of strong tea. I was checking the bat gate over one of the adits, a steel grate they install so bats can still use the tunnel but people cannot enter, when I heard it. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. From inside the hill. My first thought was rockfall. Old mines settle. Timbers fail. Water drips and stones shift. That is normal. I have heard 100 natural sounds come out of those tunnels, but rockfall does not have rhythm. Rockfall does not pause and repeat. This had a pattern even, patient, almost polite. 3, pause, 3. I stood very still with my hand on the warm steel of the gate, and I listened. The sound came again, fainter, deeper in, as if it were moving away. Then nothing, just the wind moving through the creosote and the tick of cooling metal and a cactus wren scolding somewhere up the slope. I told myself it was an animal. A pack rat knocking a stone loose. A loose timber swinging in the draft that mines breathe. Because they do breathe. The temperature difference pulls air in and out of them like slow lungs. I logged the gate as intact and I walked back to the truck and I drove home and I had a beer and I slept fine. But I mentioned it to Dale the next morning casually while we loaded the truck. I said I had heard a funny knocking in one of the vulture adits. I expected him to laugh and say something about pack rats. Instead, he went quiet for a second, which for Dale was as alarming as a scream from anyone else. "You answer it?" he asked. I laughed. "Answer what?" "It is an old mine, Dale. It was probably a rock." "Sure," he said. "Probably a rock." He went back to loading water, and he did not show me the photo of his daughter that morning, and I noticed that, and I did not understand why it bothered me. Later at the cabin, I went back to the logbooks, this time with intent. I pulled the older volumes from the cabinet, the ones nobody touches, the ones that go back 40 years, and once I knew what I was looking for, I found it threaded all through them, in different hands, across decades. Not often. A line here, a line there. Always brief. Always from someone who clearly did not want to write more than they had to. One entry, dated in the early 1980s from a mineral surveyor. "Number 6 is making noise again. Knocking. Crew refuses to descend. I do not blame them." Another, years later, in a blunt hand. "Told the new kid not to whistle near the vulture works and not to knock back at anything. He laughed at me. They always laugh. And then the one that stopped me. Because it was not a warning to someone else. It was a confession." The hand was shaky. It followed the sound of my hammer all the way to the gate. It wanted me to keep tapping so it could find the way out. "I will not work this district again. May the rest of you have the sense I did not. ECC, ECC." The same initials as the line at Quartz Tank. Whoever ECC was, they had spent years in that district and they had clearly decided, at some point, that the knocking was not a rock. I asked Ruth about it on the radio that evening, lightly, the way you ask about something you do not want to seem to care about. I asked if she knew who ECC might be, an old surveyor. Someone who wrote in the cabin logs decades back. There was a pause on the line. Ruth did not pause often. "That would be Esther Kadehi," Ruth said finally. "Esther C. Kadehi. She surveyed the mine claims out here for the better part of 30 years. Knows that ground better than the maps do." "Is she still around?" I asked. "She is," Ruth said. "She lives out past the boundary on a patented claim the government could never pry out of her hands. Keeps to herself. Half the new rangers think she is a ghost." Another pause. "If you are asking because of the vulture, leave it. Do your job up top and stay out of the works. That is what the gates are for." I did not answer it so far, I wanted to say. But I did not say it, because the way Ruth had said leave it was not the way you tell someone a campfire story. It was the way you tell someone the road is washed out ahead. That same night, a man named Garrett Voss parked a dusty silver sedan at the trailhead lot near the monument boundary, signed the visitor logbook with the wrong date, listed his planned route as exploring, and walked off into the Vulture District alone, carrying a daypack, 2 liters of water, and, as we later found, a metal detector and a rock hammer. He did not come back. Garrett Voss was reported missing on a Friday afternoon, 3 days after he had signed in. by his sister, who lived in Phoenix and had not been able to reach him. She told Dispatch he was an amateur prospector and history enthusiast who liked to explore old mining districts, that he had mentioned this monument specifically, and that he never went more than 2 days without texting her. By the time the report reached us, Garrett had been alone in the desert, in June, in country full of open shafts, for the better part of 72 hours. That arithmetic is its own kind of horror before you add anything to it. A person without water does not last that long out there. We all knew it. Nobody said it. Reyes ran the search by the book, because Reyes ran everything by the book. He stood us up in the equipment bay with a topographic map taped to the wall, and laid out the incident command structure, the search sectors, the resources. He requested air support, but the helicopter was committed to a fire detail 2 counties over and would not be free until the next day. So the first day was us, on the ground, in the heat, plus 2 volunteers from the county search and rescue team and a deputy. 8 people to cover thousands of acres of broken, mined, lethal ground. Dale found the car. The silver sedan, locked, hot enough to cook on, sitting at the boundary lot with a parking citation already curling under the wiper from some front country ranger who had not yet connected it to a missing person. Inside, through the glass, we could see fast food wrappers, a folded map of the historic mining district sold in gift shops 30 years ago, and a printout of a forum post. We could not read the post through the glass, but later, when the sister gave consent and we opened the car, we read it. It was a discussion thread among amateur treasure hunters about the Vulture District, about a lost high-grade silver vein that the old company had supposedly walled off and never reported, about the number 6 shaft, and about, and I am quoting the thread from memory, the weird knocking sounds people report near the old workings, probably just air movement, super atmospheric, would love to hear it in person. Garrett Voss had not come to the desert in spite of the knocking. He had come because of it. We tracked him. This is the part of the job that the public never sees and that television gets completely wrong. Real tracking is slow, miserable, eye-straining work. You move at a crawl, reading the ground for sign, a partial boot print in a patch of fine silt, a kicked stone showing its darker underside, a snapped twig on a palo verde at shin height, a scuff on a rock ledge. The county SAR tracker, a quiet older woman named Pat who I never heard raise her voice once, was extraordinary at it. She cut Garrett's trail near the trailhead and held it, on and off, all the way up into the lower Vulture works, losing it on bare rock and finding it again in the next patch of soil with a patience that bordered on the supernatural. The trail led where we knew it would lead. Up, toward the heaviest cluster of old workings. Toward the number 6. We did not reach the upper district that first day. The light went, and Reyes pulled everyone back, because searching that ground in the dark, on foot, near open shafts, is how searchers become victims. We made a base camp at the quartz tank cabin. The volunteers and the deputy slept in the front country and would drive back up at dawn. Dale and I stayed at the cabin with Reyes to hold the forward position. That was the first night I heard the knocking with another person standing beside me. It was after midnight. The heat had finally let go of the day, and the desert had filled up with the small sounds it makes at night. The rustle of a kangaroo rat, the trilling of insects, the distant yip of coyotes working a kill somewhere. Dale and I were outside the cabin, leaning on the truck, not talking much, both of us thinking about a man dying of thirst somewhere above us in the dark. Reyes was inside on the radio with Ruth, running the evening check-in, and then, from up the slope, from the direction of the upper works came the sound. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps, clear and even in the still night air, carrying down the hillside the way sound carries in the desert after dark, which is to say much farther than it has any right to. Dale's beer can stopped halfway to his mouth. "You hear that?" I said. It was not a question. "I hear it," Dale said. His voice had gone flat. "Do not say anything back. Do not whistle. Do not knock on the truck. Just listen." We listened. The sound came again, 3 and 3, and then it changed. It moved. The next set of taps came from slightly to the left of the first, lower down the slope, closer to us. Then another set, closer still. It was not echoing. An echo does not walk down a hill toward you. Something was making that sound, and it was coming nearer, set by set, taking its time, the way a person knocks their way down a dark hallway feeling for a door. I want to describe what that does to a body. It is not the spike of a jump scare. It is slower and worse. It is the animal under your skin waking up and telling you, in a language older than words, that you are prey and that you should already be running. My mouth went dry past thirst. My hands felt very far away. Beside me, Dale had gone completely still, and I realized he was holding the laminated photo of his daughter in one fist without seeming to know he had taken it out. The cabin door opened. Reyes stood in the spill of lamplight, toothpick gone, and the look on his face told me he had heard it through the open window. For a moment, none of us moved. The taps came one more time, very close now, just up the slope, from the black mass of a creosote thicket maybe 60 yards above the cabin. 3. Pause. 3. And then Reyes did the only smart thing any of us did that whole week. He stepped back inside, came out with the truck keys, started the engine, and turned the headlights and the spotlight full onto the slope. The thicket leapt into hard white light, brush, rock, a startled jackrabbit bolting, and nothing else. No animal large enough to make that sound. No person. Nothing. The knocking stopped. We did not sleep that night. Reyes did not order us inside, and we did not ask to go. We sat in the cab of the truck with the engine running and the lights on until the sky went gray. And not one of us said the word that was sitting in all three of our mouths. At first light, Reyes did something that was not in any procedure. He told Dale and me to drive out to Esther Cudahy's place before we rejoined the search. He did it quietly, almost ashamed, the way a careful man does a thing he cannot fully justify. She knows the number 6 better than the survey, he said. If Voss went where I think he went, I want to know what we are walking into. And I do not want to hear about knocking from a logbook. I want to hear it from a living person. He looked at me. You found the entries, you ask her. Esther Cudahy lived at the end of 4 miles of washboard dirt on a patented mining claim her family had held for over a century. A square of private ground the federal monument had been forced to surround but could never absorb. Her house was a low adobe with a tin roof and a wall of stacked ore samples along the porch. She was outside when we pulled up, a small, leathery woman somewhere past 80, in a man's work shirt and a straw hat, repairing a section of fence with a competence that put me to shame. She watched us get out of the truck the way she might watch weather she did not like the look of. You are looking for the boy with the metal detector, she said, before we said a word. The one chasing the lost vein. Dale and I looked at each other. How did you know that, ma'am? Dale said. Because they are all looking for the lost vein, she said. There is no lost vein. There never was. The company walled off the lower drifts of the number 6 in 1941 and told the men it was about ore values. It was not about ore values. She set down her fencing pliers. You heard it. I can see it on you. You heard it and you came to ask me if you are crazy. You are not crazy. Come inside. It is too hot to be a fool out here. Inside, the adobe was cool and dim and smelled of coffee and dust and old paper. There were decades of survey notes in bankers' boxes along one wall, and topographic maps annotated in a hand I now recognized. ECC. I told her I had read her entries in the cabin logbooks. She did not seem surprised. She poured 3 cups of coffee no one had asked for, and sat down across from us and folded her hands. I am going to tell you what Esther told us, but I want to keep a promise I made to myself, which is not to pretend she explained the whole thing. Because she did not. She knew more than anyone, and she still knew almost nothing, and she said so plainly. She was not a storyteller building toward a reveal. She was an old surveyor reporting field observations about something she could not classify, and the not classifying was the most frightening thing about her. The old miners called them the knockers, she said. Tommy knockers, some of them. From the old country, the Cornish men who came over for the copper. Most of the men thought they were friendly. Spirits of the dead, they said, or little men in the rock, knocking to warn you before a cave-in, knocking to lead you to good ore. Some men left them food, bits of their lunch, on the timbers, for luck. She turned her coffee cup slowly without drinking from it. I do not know what they are. I am not going to insult you by guessing. I spent 30 years in this district and I will tell you only what I observed, and you can do with it what you like. She held up one finger. First, the knocking is real. It is not air movement, and it is not pack rats, and it is not your nerves, though it will use your nerves against you. It is a sound made on purpose. A second finger. Second, It mimics. If you tap, it taps your rhythm back. If you knock 3 times, it knocks 3 times. This is why the old men said do not answer it. Because once you answer, it has your attention and it learns you. It learned the sound of a hammer. It learned the sound of a pick. Toward the end, I believe it learned the sound of a voice. She paused. I will not say more about the voice. I heard it once and I left the district and I never went back down a shaft in my life. A third finger. Third, and this is the one that matters for your boy. It does not come up. In 30 years I never knew it to leave the works. It lives in the dark and the deep and the cold water at the bottom of the number 6. It cannot abide the open desert and the sun, so a man up top is safe, mostly. The danger is not that it comes for you. The danger is that it calls and you go down. Dale's voice was very small. Calls how? Esther looked at him for a long moment, and something in her face softened, and that softening was worse than anything she had said. It calls in a voice you love, she said, or a voice you owe. It learns who you are listening for, and then it is that, down in the dark, just out of reach, asking you to come find it. That is how it gets the ones who do not believe in it. It does not need them to believe. It only needs them to follow the sound of someone they cannot leave behind. She stood up, signaling that we were done. If your boy went into the number 6, he did not fall in by accident. Something asked him in, and if you go down after him, you had best be very sure of whose voice you are following. At the door, she put her hand on my arm. Her grip was dry and strong as wire. Do not answer it, she said. Whatever it does. Whatever it sounds like. You do not answer. We rejoined the search at the upper works by mid-morning, and I carried Esther Kudahi's words up that hillside like a second pack, heavier than my water. The helicopter came at last, beating up the wash and circling the vulture peaks while we worked the ground beneath it. With air support and a full ground team, we moved faster, and by noon Pat had cut Garrett's trail again at the lower edge of the upper district and followed it straight up into the worst of it. The upper vulture works are a graveyard of industry. Head frames lean at broken angles over capped shafts. Rusted ore cars sit half-buried in mine tailings the color of dried blood. Adits gape in the hillsides behind sagging fences and faded signs, and at the heart of it, on a leveled bench cut into the mountain, stands the number 6. The shaft is collared with old timber and a ring of concrete, and a steel safety grate had once covered the opening. I say had because when we reached it, the grate was open. It had been pried up and dragged aside. The bolts were sheared. The metal was bent. It had taken real effort, the work of a desperate man with a rock hammer and hours of time. And the marks of that hammer were all over the steel. Beside the open collar, neatly set on a flat stone as if placed there with care, were Garrett Voss's daypack, his empty water bottles, and his metal detector. His rock hammer was gone. So was he. We called down the shaft. We shone lights. The beams fell away into a darkness so total it seemed to drink them, and far below, faint, we could hear the slow drip of water onto water. No answer came. Reyes was on the radio to Ruth within a minute, requesting a technical rescue team, ropes, lights, a cave and mine rescue specialist out of the city, anything. Ruth's voice came back tight. The technical team was hours out. The afternoon was burning down, and a man might be alive at the bottom of a 400-foot shaft, hurt, in the dark, in the cold water, while we stood in the sun and waited for help that could not come fast enough. I want to tell you about the smell, because Esther had told us to listen and I had braced for sound, and so the smell caught me unprepared. As we worked around the collar of the number 6, a draft came up out of the shaft, the deep breath of the mine, and it carried a smell I have never been able to forget or describe well. It was cold, first, shockingly cold in that heat, the breath of stone that has never seen the sun. And under the cold was something organic and wrong, a wet mineral rot, like a flooded cellar, like meat left in standing water, like the inside of a mouth. It came in waves, with the breathing of the shaft, in and then out, and every time it breathed out, that smell rolled over us, and every man and woman on that bench went quiet and pale in turn as it reached them. The dog noticed it too. The county team had a search dog, a steady old shepherd named Boone who had worked dozens of these. Boone would not approach the collar of the number 6. He planted his feet 10 yards back, hackles up the length of his spine, and he did not bark and he did not growl. He whined, low and continuous, The way a dog whines at a thing it does not have the equipment to understand, and his handler could not move him an inch closer. Eventually, she leashed him to the truck and he sat there shaking in 95-degree heat. And then, around 4 in the afternoon, with the shadows beginning to stretch and the technical team still 2 hours out, the knocking started again. From down in the shaft this time. From the dark beneath our feet, 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. Rising up the 400 feet of black air as clearly as if it were 10 feet down. Everyone on that bench heard it. The deputy crossed himself. One of the volunteers, a man who had not said 10 words all day, sat down hard on a tailings pile and put his face in his hands. Reyes stood at the collar with his jaw working and his hand on his sidearm, which was useless, which we all knew was useless, and which he gripped anyway because a man needs to hold something. And from down in the dark, after the knocking, came a voice. "Help me." It was a young man's voice, hoarse and broken, edged with the rasp of 3 days without water. It came up out of the shaft, thin and desperate, and it said it again. "Help me. I am down here. Please." And it was the most human, most pitiable sound I have ever heard. And every instinct I owned screamed at me to grab a rope and go. Pat the tracker had her hand on my shoulder before I knew I had moved. "You did not know his voice," she said quietly. "None of us knew his voice. So how do you know that is him?" I did not have an answer. None of us had ever heard Garrett Voss speak. We had no recording, no memory, nothing to match against the voice in the dark. It could have been him, dying, real, 400 feet down, or it could have been the thing Esther had warned us about, calling in a voice it had stolen, the voice of a man it had already taken, learned and replayed to bring more of us down to it. There was no way to know. That was the horror of it. There was no way to know, and a man might be dying while we stood there refusing to believe our own ears. Before I tell you what came up out of that shaft next, I need to stop for one moment, because I know what is happening right now. I know a lot of you have been here with me for a while. You have watched these stories before, late at night, with the lights off, the same way you are watching this one, and I know that many of you still have not tapped that like button, and still are not subscribed. I am not saying that to scold you. I am saying it because we are about to go to the worst part of this, and I would rather you do it now, in the light, than after, when your hands do not feel like your own. So if you are watching anywhere, on your phone, on your television, in the dark, take 1 second, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell. Then come back down into the number 6 with me, because what I heard next is the reason I do not sleep in silence anymore. We did not go down before the team arrived. That was the right call, and it nearly broke us all to make it. Reyes held the line. He stood at the collar of the number 6 and he ordered every person back from the edge. And when the voice begged from the dark, he keyed his radio and read map coordinates to Ruth in a steady monotone, over and over, using the procedure like a handrail, because the procedure was the only thing keeping him from going down those 400 feet to a son's voice that was not his son's. I learned later that Reyes had lost a boy, years before, in a different state, in a different kind of accident. He never told me. Ruth told me, much later when it was over. So when the voice in the shaft changed, around dusk, from a stranger's cry for help into something smaller and more terrible, into a young boy calling for his father by a name only a father would know, I understood why Reyes dropped to his knees at the collar, and why 2 of us had to physically hold him back from the edge. The thing in the dark had found the sound he could not leave behind. It had reached up the shaft and into the worst day of his life, and pulled it out and played it back to him. That was the one moment I will not fully explain, because I do not fully understand it, and because I made a promise to tell this honestly. We never determined how the thing produced that voice. We never found a recording, a speaker, a trick. There was no person down there capable of knowing what it knew. I am only telling you what I heard, and what it did to a strong man, and that we held him back, and that he wept, and that the technical rescue team came up the road in the last light to find a federal district ranger being restrained by his own people at the edge of a mine shaft, while a dead child's voice called up out of the ground. The rescue team were professionals from a mine and cave unit in the city, and they did not believe a word of what we told them. And I do not blame them. They rigged the shaft properly, with redundant anchors and lights and a comms line, and at first light the next morning a rescue specialist named Marisol Ortega went down the number 6 on 1,000 feet of rope to find Garrett Voss, alive or otherwise. I was one of her topside team. I worked the comms line. I want to tell you exactly what came up that line, because I heard all of it, and because it is the closest thing to proof I will ever have. For the first 300 feet. Ordinary. Ortega called out depth markers, rock conditions, the wet cold, the smell, which she described in clipped, increasingly unsettled words. At 340 feet she reached a station, an old timbered cutout in the shaft wall where the lower drifts branched off, the drifts the company had walled in 1941. The seal was broken, something had broken it from inside. At 360 feet, just above the waterline, she found Garrett Voss. He was alive. Barely. He was wedged on a ledge above the flooded bottom. His legs broken, severely dehydrated, in and out of consciousness. He had been there for days, and here is the part that I have never been able to set down right, the part Ortega will not discuss to this day. She reported, over the comms line, in a voice that started professional and ended in something close to a child's, that Voss was not alone on that ledge, that there was a sound in the dark beyond him, in the broken seal of the lower drift, knocking, that her lights would not seem to reach into that drift, that the beam simply stopped at the broken seal, as if the dark in there were a solid thing, and that Garrett Voss, half dead, kept turning his ruined face toward that darkness and whispering to it, answering it, tapping his broken fingers against the rock in a slow, weak rhythm. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps. He had been answering it for 3 days. It had kept him alive, I think, the way a person keeps a fish in a bucket. Alive, and answering, and calling the rest of us down. Ortega did the bravest thing I have ever known a person to do. She did not run. She clipped Garrett Voss into the rescue harness with the knocking coming out of the broken seal not 10 feet from her. And she gave the call to haul, and she came up that shaft with a dying man strapped to her chest and the dark of the lower drift reaching after both of them. The last thing she said before she went silent for the rest of the ascent, the last thing that came up the comms line, was 4 words, and I have heard them in my sleep every night since. It is following the rope. We hauled them up. The work of getting a litter and 2 people up 360 feet of shaft took the better part of an hour, and that hour was the longest of my life. The knocking followed them. We could hear it coming up the shaft beneath the rope, set by set, rising, the same patient 3 and 3, closer, closer, as if something were climbing the timbers in the dark just below the lights. The rescue team kept their faces blank and their hands working, hauling, but I saw the lead rigger glance down into the shaft once, and I saw his face, and I never want to see that expression on a human being again. When the litter cleared the collar and Garrett Voss came up into the morning sun, the knocking stopped. It stopped the instant the light touched him, the way Esther had said. The thing did not come up. It cannot abide the open desert and the sun. But for one moment, in the half-second before the litter cleared, while Ortega's shoulders were still below the lip of the collar, I was looking down into the shaft with the others and I saw something. I am not going to tell you I saw it clearly, because I did not, and I will not lie to you to make a better story. I saw at the edge of the lights, just below Ortega's feet, in the broken dark, something pale move, something that was the wrong shape and the wrong size, that recoiled from the rising light, that was there and then was not. It made no sound as it went, it only stopped knocking. And then there was sun, and a dying man on a litter, and people shouting medical numbers, and the ordinary frantic noise of a rescue, and the dark below us was just dark again. Garrett Voss lived. I want you to have that, because so little else about this is a mercy. The medical flight took him out, and he survived his injuries, the broken legs, the renal failure, the long climb back from dehydration that nearly killed him. He survived all of it, but he was not whole when he came up that shaft, and the people who treated him say he never came all the way back. He does not speak much now. When he does, his sister says, he sometimes stops in the middle of a sentence and goes still and listens, his head tilted, as if for a sound the rest of us cannot hear. And once, she told us, when he thought he was alone, she found him sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, tapping his fingers slowly against the wood. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. Answering something that was not there, or that was there, and that we could not hear, because we had not spent 3 days in the dark learning its language. Reyes retired 4 months early. He did not reach his clean record. There was no fatality. So in the cold arithmetic of the agency, the search was a success. A man recovered alive against the odds, a feather in the monument's cap. They wanted to put him forward for a commendation. He declined it. He turned in his badge and his sidearm and he drove out of that country, and as far as I know, he has never spoken about the number 6 to anyone, the way Esther never spoke about the voice she heard, the way Ortega will not discuss the broken seal. There is a kind of person, I have learned, who survives the deep dark and then spends the rest of their life pretending they did not hear what they heard. I do not judge them. I am, mostly, one of them. Dale Brunner got his permanent position that fall. The monument made him a full-time backcountry ranger. Benefits and all. The thing he had wanted for 3 years. The thing his whole family depended on. He took it. Of course he took it. But the Dale who took it was a quieter man than the one who used to show everyone the laminated photo of his daughter. He requested a transfer out of the Vulture District and got it. He does not patrol the upper works anymore. And he told me, the last time I saw him, with his hand wrapped tight around a coffee cup so I would not see it shake, that the worst part was not the knocking and was not the voice. The worst part, he said, was that some nights now, at home, safe, with his family asleep down the hall, he catches himself wanting to answer it. He catches his own hand lifting to tap on the headboard. 3 and 3, just to see. He said he has to lie on his hands sometimes to keep them still. I do not know what to do with that. I do not know how to help him. The thing never left the number 6. Everyone agrees on that. It cannot abide the sun. It lives in the deep and the cold water and the broken dark behind a seal that men in 1941 were so frightened of that they walled it in and lied about why. It does not come up, but it does not have to come up. That is the part I finally understand. It does not have to come up, because it sends the knocking up instead, and the knocking gets inside you and it waits. It learns the rhythm of you, and then for the rest of your life, on the bad nights, it asks you, in the only language it has, to answer. And the terrible secret, the one Esther knew, the one Reyes knew, the one I know now, is that a part of you, a deep cold part you did not know you had, always wants to. I left the monument at the end of that season. I did not transfer like Dale. I did not retire like Reyes. I simply did not renew my seasonal contract. And I drove out of that low desert country in the first week of October with the saguaros standing on the ridges behind me, counting the dead, counting me among the ones who got away, mostly got away. I went back to a city. Not the same one, but a city, with glass and fluorescent light and beeping doors. The exact life I had been so glad to escape. I went back to it on purpose. I wanted noise. I wanted machines and traffic and the constant low roar of a place where it is never truly silent, because I had learned that the knocking needs silence to be heard, and I was determined never to be that quiet again. For a long time it worked. The city is loud. The city does not breathe cold air up out of the ground at you. I slept with a fan running and a radio low, and I told myself I was a man who had survived a strange and frightening thing in the desert, and that the worst of it was behind me. I want to end this honestly, the way Esther ended everything she told me, with only what I observed and no comfortable lie laid over the top of it. 3 weeks ago, the power went out in my building in the middle of the night. A summer storm took the grid down for the whole block. The fan stopped, the radio died, and for the first time in 2 years, I was lying in true darkness, in true silence, and I became aware that I had been waiting for this without knowing it. The way you become aware you have been holding your breath. I lay there. The silence was complete. And then, from somewhere in the walls of that old building, from the pipes or the settling timbers or from nowhere I could name, came a sound. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps, patient, even, almost polite, asking. I told myself it was the building, cooling pipes, settling joists. A reasonable person explains these things, and I have spent 2 years being a reasonable person, and I lay there in the dark and I explained it to myself with everything I had. But Esther's voice was louder than my reasons. It does not have to come up, it only has to send the sound. And I lay in that black silent room with my hand already lifted off the mattress, my fingers already curled, the deep cold part of me that I brought up out of the number 6 already moving without my permission, wanting, needing to tap back. 3 and 3, just to see, just to answer, just once. I did not answer it. I want you to know that. I lay on my hands until the power came back 40 minutes later, and the fan spun up, and the radio crackled to life, and the ordinary loud world returned, and the tapping, if it was ever there, was gone. I did not answer it that night, but I am telling you the truth now. All of it, the way I promised. So I will tell you this last thing. The storms come every few weeks in the summer. The power goes out, the fan stops, the silence comes. And every time, my hand lifts off the mattress a little faster than it did the time before. Every time, the cold part of me argues a little better. Every time, it is a little harder to lie there and not find out what would answer if I tapped back. So if you have hiked an old mining district, and you have stood at the mouth of a closed adit, and you have heard a sound come out of the dark that had a rhythm to it, 3 taps and a pause and 3 taps again, I am going to give you the only thing Esther Kudehi gave me, the only thing that is worth anything in all of this. Do not answer it, whatever it sounds like, whoever it sounds like. However badly the deep cold part of you wants to, do not answer it, because it is patient, and it has all the time in the world, and it is still down there in the dark in the cold water, breathing its rot up into the desert night, knocking and waiting for you to finally tap back. I've never told anyone the complete story of what happened that spring break when I was 14. 3 years have passed since that day, but the memories remain vivid, too vivid, keeping me awake on stormy nights when the branches scrape against my bedroom window. The rational part of my mind understands that what we experienced that afternoon behind the restaurant was likely nothing more than an abandoned playground coupled with our overactive imaginations. Yet the irrational part, the primitive brainstem that controls our fight-or-flight response, refuses to accept such a simple explanation. It was April 2022 when my parents decided I should spend time with family during spring break instead of wasting away in front of screens at home. They arranged for me to stay at my uncle's cabin in the North Woods with my 11-year-old cousin, Ivy. I wasn't thrilled about the arrangement initially. Being 14 meant I'd rather spend time with friends than babysit a younger cousin, but my protests fell on deaf ears. The cabin itself was nothing remarkable. A 2-bedroom wooden structure nestled among towering pine trees about 30 miles from the nearest town. My Uncle William had inherited it from his father and visited occasionally for hunting and fishing trips. The walls were adorned with mounted fish and photographs of successful hunting expeditions. A musty odor of mothballs and old wood permeated every room. Uncle William's wife, my Aunt Patricia, would be supervising us during our stay. She was a practical woman who preferred outdoor activities to indoor comforts, which explained why the cabin's amenities were limited to the basics: running water, electricity, and a wood-burning stove for heating. No internet connection, spotty cell service at best. On our 3rd day at the cabin, after a morning spent hiking through the surrounding woods, Aunt Patricia suggested we drive into town for lunch at Riverbank Diner, a local establishment she claimed served the best country fried steak in the county. The prospect of a proper meal excited both Ivy and me after days of Aunt Patricia's questionable cooking skills. The drive took almost 40 minutes along winding roads bordered by dense forest. I spent the journey watching the endless sea of trees while Ivy chattered away about a frog she'd found that morning by the small creek running behind the cabin. "Do you think we'll see any bears?" Ivy asked, her voice tinged with both fear and hope. "Not likely," I replied. "They usually avoid people." "What about wolves? Uncle William said there are wolves around here." I shrugged. "Maybe. But they're more afraid of us than we are of them." Riverbank Diner stood at the edge of the small town, a weathered structure with faded red paint and a sign that had seen better days. The parking lot contained only a handful of vehicles, mostly pickup trucks and SUVs with mud-splattered tires. A bell jingled as we entered, announcing our arrival to the sparse crowd of locals enjoying their midday meals. The interior smelled of grease, coffee, and pine-scented cleaning solution. Wood paneling covered the walls, interrupted occasionally by framed black and white photographs of the town from decades past. A counter with red vinyl stools ran along one wall, while booths with cracked leather seats occupied the opposite side. A waitress in her 50s with bottle blonde hair piled high on her head approached us with a tired smile. Her name tag read, Betty. "Welcome to Riverbank," she said, leading us to a booth near the back. Don't get many visitors this time of year. Aunt Patricia exchanged pleasantries with Betty, revealing they had attended the same high school years earlier. They fell into conversation about people I didn't know, leaving Ivy and me to examine our laminated menus. I want a milkshake, Ivy whispered, her eyes wide with anticipation. Ask Aunt Patricia, I suggested, scanning the lunch options. The meal itself was unremarkable, standard diner fare that satisfied our hunger without inspiring culinary praise. Ivy spilled her chocolate milkshake on her shirt, causing Aunt Patricia to sigh in exasperation and dab at the stain with napkins. As we finished our meal, Betty returned to clear our plates. Got kids with you today, huh, Patricia? She said, nodding toward us. My niece and nephew, Aunt Patricia confirmed, trying to keep them entertained for the week. Betty leaned down conspiratorially. There's a playground out back if they want to burn off some energy. My grandkids love it when they visit. Ivy immediately perked up. A playground? Can we go, please? Aunt Patricia checked her watch. I suppose so. I need to run to the hardware store for some supplies anyway. You two can play outside while I do that. There's an entrance through the back door, Betty offered, pointing to a door near the restrooms. Just follow the path. As we got up to leave, I noticed Betty's smile falter slightly, but I dismissed it as my imagination. Now, looking back, I wonder if she knew, if she had sent other children down that path before us. We exited through the back door of the diner into an enclosed area containing dumpsters and stacks of empty wooden pallets. The smell of rotting food and cigarette smoke hung in the air. A narrow dirt path led from a gap in the wooden fence into the woods behind the restaurant. Do you think it's far? Ivy asked, already starting down the path. Betty made it sound close, I replied, following her. It's probably just through these trees. The path wound its way through underbrush and between pine trees. Though it was early afternoon, the dense canopy above cast everything in shadow. The sounds of the diner, clinking dishes, conversations, occasional bursts of laughter, faded with each step until all we could hear was the crunch of pine needles beneath our feet and the distant calls of birds. This is taking forever, Ivy complained after several minutes of walking. I had to agree. The path seemed to stretch on much longer than expected for a playground supposedly behind a restaurant. I was about to suggest turning back when the trees ahead thinned, revealing a small clearing. Look! Ivy pointed excitedly. I see something! The clearing opened before us, approximately 30 yards in diameter, surrounded on all sides by towering pine trees that seemed to lean inward, as if watching us. The ground was mostly dirt, with patches of yellowed grass struggling to grow in the perpetual shade. At first glance, the area appeared to be an abandoned lot rather than a playground. Debris littered the ground, broken bottles, cigarette butts, faded food wrappers. But as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw what had caught Ivy's attention. The outline of playground equipment on the far side of the clearing. Something about the scene felt wrong. The playground equipment appeared disproportionate, misaligned somehow, as if designed by someone who had only heard descriptions of what a playground should look like without ever having seen one. Come on, Ivy called, already halfway across the clearing. I hesitated, scanning our surroundings. The air felt heavier here, stagnant. No breeze disturbed the branches above us. No birds called. Even the insects seemed to have fallen silent. Wait up, I said, hurrying after her while trying to dismiss my growing unease. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just an old playground, nothing more. Why then did each step toward it fill me with increasing dread? Before we reached the playground equipment, we encountered an old couch sitting incongruously beneath a tall pine tree. The furniture piece was filthy, its fabric torn in multiple places with stuffing spilling out like yellow intestines. Dark stains spread across its cushions in patterns that resembled crude faces if you looked at them too long. Who would put a couch out here? I wondered aloud. Ivy shrugged, already looking beyond it to the playground equipment. Maybe teenagers use it to hang out? The thought of people voluntarily spending time in this gloomy clearing disturbed me. I stepped around the couch, noticing empty beer cans and cigarette butts concentrated around it, supporting Ivy's theory. Beyond the couch stood what I presumed to be the playground Betty had mentioned. A rusted swing set with 2 remaining swings, the third chain dangling empty, stood beside a metal slide with peeling green paint. The slide's ladder was missing several rungs, and what appeared to be initials and crude symbols had been scratched into its surface. Ivy approached the swings, testing one cautiously before sitting down. Be careful, I warned. That thing looks ancient. It's fine, she replied, pushing off with her feet to start swinging. The structure creaked ominously with each forward movement, but held together. I remained standing, suddenly reluctant to touch anything in this place. While Ivy swung, I surveyed our surroundings more carefully. The clearing wasn't as natural as it had first appeared. The ground showed evidence of having been leveled at some point, though nature had begun to reclaim it. Weeds pushed through cracks in what might once have been a concrete pad. At the edges of the clearing, garbage had accumulated. Rusted appliances, tires, broken furniture. Then I noticed something that made my stomach contract. On the opposite side of the clearing stood what resembled a jungle gym, but distorted in a way that defied logical explanation. The metal bars formed angles that seemed to change when viewed from different positions. A large black electrical cord wrapped around the topmost bar, hanging down several feet. Attached to it was a yellow extension cord with a light fixture dangling at its end. Most disturbing of all was what hung from another section of the structure, a baby doll suspended by a strip of black cloth around its neck. The doll's plastic face had been partially melted, its painted features dripping down in a parody of tears. Its limbs were positioned at impossible angles, and someone had drawn crude symbols across its torso with what looked like red marker, or something worse. That was when the feeling of dread that had been building since we entered the clearing intensified tenfold, transforming into raw, primal fear. We weren't alone. "Ivy," I called, my voice emerging as little more than a whisper. "Ivy, we should go." She continued swinging, oblivious to my growing panic. "We just got here. Aunt Patricia won't be done shopping for at least half an hour." I stepped closer to the swing set, my eyes repeatedly drawn back to the hanging doll. From this new angle, I could see that someone had removed its eyes, leaving empty sockets that seemed to follow my movements. "This place isn't right," I insisted. "Look around you." Ivy slowed her swinging, finally noticing the disturbed expression on my face. She followed my gaze to the distorted jungle gym and the suspended doll. "That's creepy," she admitted, her previous enthusiasm dimming. "Who would do that to a doll?" "I don't know, but I don't want to stick around to find out." I gestured toward the path. "Let's go back to the diner." Ivy reluctantly slid off the swing but paused before following me. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to a structure I hadn't noticed before. Partially hidden behind a cluster of bushes at the edge of the clearing stood what appeared to be a wooden doghouse. Except this doghouse was much too large enough for a human to crawl inside comfortably. Its roof was covered with tar paper, and its entrance was a dark rectangle revealing nothing of its interior. Someone had painted a word above the entrance, but weather and time had made it illegible, with only the letters STAY remaining visible. "It's nothing," I said firmly, grabbing Ivy's hand. "Just a shed or something." Ivy pulled away from me, her curiosity overriding her better judgment. "It looks like a giant doghouse." Before I could stop her, she had crossed the clearing toward the structure. I followed reluctantly, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped animal seeking escape. As we approached, details emerged that heightened my anxiety. A chain was bolted to one side of the structure, ending in what looked disturbingly like a collar sized for a human neck. Scratches marked the wood around the entrance, some appearing to have been made from the inside. Ivy leaned forward, peering into the dark opening. I grabbed her shoulder to pull her back, but she had already seen something that made her gasp. "I think there's someone in there," she whispered, her voice trembling. I forced myself to look. The interior was shrouded in darkness, but I could make out what seemed to be a pile of blankets or rags in one corner. And something else. Something that reflected the dim light filtering through the entrance. A pair of eyes. I jerked backward, pulling Ivy with me so forcefully that she stumbled. "There's someone in the doghouse," she repeated, her voice rising in panic. Whether it was truly a person or merely an animal seeking shelter, I didn't care to discover. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape this clearing and never return. As if responding to our discovery, a sound broke the unnatural silence of the clearing. A high-pitched whirring noise coming from somewhere above us. I looked up, scanning the treetops and the sky beyond, but saw nothing that could explain the sound. "We need to go," I said, no longer bothering to hide my fear. "Now." We turned and ran toward the path, no longer concerned with appearing brave or mature. The sound above us intensified, its pitch fluctuating in a way that reminded me of a circular saw cutting through different densities of wood. It seemed to follow us, moving from one treetop to another as we fled. Just as we reached the entrance to the path, my right leg seized with an excruciating cramp. The muscle in my calf contracted violently, sending me stumbling to one knee with a cry of pain. "What's wrong?" Ivy asked, stopping a few feet ahead on the path. "Cramp," I gasped, massaging my calf desperately. "Keep going, I'll catch up." Ivy hesitated, torn between continuing to safety and staying with me. "Go," I insisted. The whirring sound was directly above us now, and looking up, I caught a glimpse of movement among the pine branches. Something dark shifting position, tracking our movements. Ivy finally obeyed, running down the path while repeatedly glancing back at me. I forced myself to stand despite the pain, putting weight on my good leg while dragging the cramped one behind me. Each step sent jolts of agony up my leg, but fear provided a powerful anesthetic. I limped after Ivy as quickly as my injured leg would allow, constantly aware of the sound following us through the trees. The path that had seemed so long on our way to the playground now felt endless. Branches clawed at my clothing and face as I stumbled forward, certain that at any moment I would feel hands grabbing me from behind. When the back of the diner finally appeared through the trees, I nearly collapsed with relief. Ivy stood at the edge of the restaurant's property, waiting for me with wide, frightened eyes. "Did you see it?" she asked as I limped the final few yards to join her. "See what?" When I looked back, she swallowed hard. There was a person following us on the path, walking real slow but following. I turned to look back at the path we had emerged from. The entrance stood empty, framed by undergrowth and pine trees swaying gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. Nothing moved among the shadows, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Let's get inside," I suggested, my voice steadier than I felt. We hurried through the back entrance of the diner, the normalcy of the kitchen sounds and fluorescent lighting providing an immediate but superficial comfort. A cook glanced at us with mild curiosity as we passed through, but said nothing. In the main dining area, the lunch crowd had thinned considerably. Betty was wiping down a table near the entrance, and she smiled as we approached. "Did you kids enjoy the playground?" she asked cheerfully. I exchanged a look with Ivy, unsure how to respond. How could Betty refer to that disturbing place as if it were a normal children's playground? "It was interesting," I managed to say. Betty's smile faltered slightly. "It's seen better days, I suppose. The town used to maintain it properly, but budget cuts, you know how it is." Her casual explanation stunned me into silence. Had we somehow misinterpreted everything we'd seen? Was the hanging doll just discarded trash? The doghouse some abandoned storage shed? The eyes merely a reflection or a small animal? Before I could formulate more questions, Aunt Patricia entered the diner, carrying bags from the hardware store. "There you are," she said. "Ready to head back to the cabin?" On the drive back to the cabin, Ivy and I sat in silence while Aunt Patricia talked about the supplies she'd purchased and her plans for fixing the cabin's leaking roof. Neither of us mentioned what we'd experienced behind the restaurant. I wasn't sure if it was because we feared not being believed, or because speaking about it would somehow make it more real. My leg continued to throb, the muscle still tight from the cramp. I massaged it absently while staring out the window at the passing forest, seeing hanging dolls and oversized doghouses in every shadow between the trees. When we arrived at the cabin, Aunt Patricia instructed us to wash up before dinner. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection in the spotted mirror. My complexion appeared paler than usual, with dark circles forming beneath my eyes despite having slept well the previous night. During dinner, Ivy pushed her food around her plate without eating much, uncharacteristically quiet. Aunt Patricia noticed, pressing the back of her hand to Ivy's forehead to check for fever. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked. Ivy nodded unconvincingly. "Just tired from playing." "You didn't overexert yourself at that playground, did you?" Aunt Patricia frowned. "Betty mentioned it was old. I probably should have checked it out myself before letting you two go off alone." The opportunity to tell her what we'd seen presented itself, but when I opened my mouth, different words emerged. "It was fine, just old swings and a slide." Why had I lied? Part of me worried that Aunt Patricia would dismiss our experience as childish imagination. Another part feared she would believe us and investigate, potentially encountering whatever had followed us on the path. After dinner, Ivy and I sat on the cabin's small porch, watching darkness settle over the forest. The usual evening sounds, owls hooting, insects chirping, the occasional rustling of nocturnal animals, seemed threatening now in a way they hadn't before. "We should tell someone," Ivy said suddenly, breaking our prolonged silence. "Tell them what? That we found a creepy playground? That doesn't exactly warrant calling the police." "What about the doghouse? Someone was in there, I know it." I sighed, rubbing my still sore calf. Maybe it was a homeless person using it for shelter. Or maybe it was just an animal. "You saw the eyes," Ivy insisted. "Those weren't animal eyes." "We don't know that for sure." Ivy turned to face me directly. "Why are you pretending it wasn't weird? You were scared too. I saw your face." She was right. I was attempting to rationalize what we'd experienced, to file it away as something explainable and therefore less frightening. But deep down, I knew better. "What about the sound?" I asked quietly. "The whirring noise that followed us? Could have been machinery somewhere, or a drone. In the middle of the woods." We fell silent again, each lost in our own thoughts. Eventually, Aunt Patricia called us inside as night had fully descended. She had prepared the couch for me to sleep on while Ivy would take the small guest bedroom. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every creak of the cabin's wooden structure, every whisper of wind through the pine needles outside, jolted me back to alertness. When I finally did drift off, my dreams were filled with distorted playground equipment and dark openings where eyes gleamed from shadows. I'm 17 now, and I haven't returned to that town or my uncle's cabin since that spring break. My parents divorced the following year, and summer vacations have been spent shuttling between their separate homes in the city. Ivy and I don't talk about what happened, though occasionally I catch her watching me with a questioning look during family gatherings, as if wondering if I still remember. I remember. Every detail remains preserved in my memory with disturbing clarity. Last month, curiosity and the passage of time emboldened me to search online for information about the town, and specifically the Riverbank Diner. What I found disturbed me more than I anticipated. The diner had closed permanently 6 months after our visit. Local news articles cited health code violations without specifying details. More disturbing were the comment sections beneath these articles, where locals hinted at darker reasons for the closure. One commenter wrote, "That place was always wrong. Remember the Hanson boy in '98? Another replied, "They never should have built on that land. Some places aren't meant for people." The most unsettling discovery came from a blog dedicated to local history. A post from 2015 included a black and white photograph from the 1940s showing the clearing where we had found the playground. No playground equipment existed then, but in its place stood a large house. The caption read, "Woodman Estate before the fire of 1952. 7 children perished when the orphanage burned. Local rumors claimed the director had been performing experiments on his charges." I've tried contacting the blog's author for more information, but my emails have gone unanswered. Public records from that era are sparse, and what little I've found makes no mention of experiments or unusual circumstances surrounding the fire. Sometimes, I wonder if Ivy saw the same things I did that day. Children's memories are malleable, susceptible to suggestion and revision over time. Perhaps what I recall as terrifying was merely an abandoned playground with ordinary debris that my 14-year-old mind transformed into something sinister. Yet this rationalization fails to explain certain details. The whirring sound that followed us, the eyes in the doghouse, the feeling of being watched. These elements resist logical explanation. Last week, I received a text message from an unknown number. It contained only 5 words. "Do you remember the playground?" I didn't respond. I blocked the number immediately, telling myself it was merely a wrong number or random spam. My hands trembled for hours afterward. Tonight, as I write this account, a familiar sound has been drifting through my bedroom window, a high-pitched whirring that rises and falls in pitch like a circular saw cutting through different densities of wood. It's been 3 years since I heard that sound, but I recognized it instantly. I've closed the blinds and locked the window. I've told myself it's just construction somewhere in the neighborhood, though it's nearly midnight and no lights are visible outside. Part of me wants to dismiss everything that happened as the overactive imagination of a 14-year-old. But another part knows better. Some places in this world exist at the intersection of what's real and what shouldn't be. The playground behind Riverbank Diner was such a place, a location where something terrible had occurred and left an imprint that time couldn't erase. I don't know what watched us from the doghouse that day, or what followed us along the path. I don't want to know. Some questions are better left unanswered. But sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if it knows where to find me. If you're reading this and come across a small diner at the edge of a forest with a playground behind it, my advice is simple. Keep driving. Some playgrounds aren't meant for children or for anyone else. I've spent most of my adult life trying to understand the story my mother told me. Growing up, I knew she harbored something, a memory or experience that occasionally surfaced in her cautious glances toward the tree line when dusk approached. It wasn't until 2018, when I was helping her pack for her move to a retirement community, that she finally shared what happened in the summer of 1979. What follows is her account as told to me, reconstructed with the details I've carefully collected over numerous conversations since then. My mother, Diane, grew up in the remote mountains of eastern Tennessee, where the Appalachian wilderness still held secrets in its ancient hollows and densely wooded slopes. Her childhood home was a sturdy log cabin situated on 40 acres of woodland property, accessible only by a winding dirt road that became nearly impassable after heavy rains. The nearest neighbor lived 3 miles down the mountain, and the closest town was a 40-minute drive when road conditions were favorable. Diane's father, my grandfather James, worked as a wholesale buyer at car auctions across several states. His job required frequent travel, sometimes leaving him away from home for 2 or 3 weeks at a stretch. My grandmother Eleanor managed the property while working 4 shifts weekly at the Pinewood Diner, a local establishment that served hearty meals to locals and the occasional lost tourist. This arrangement left my mother and her younger sister Rebecca largely to their own devices, especially during summer breaks when school couldn't provide structure to their days. In that era, children enjoyed freedoms nearly unimaginable today. While children in suburbs played within the confines of fenced yards and paved driveways, my mother roamed miles of untamed forest, returning home only when hunger or darkness demanded it. The mountains were my playground, she often told me, a nostalgic smile briefly lifting the perpetual furrow between her brows. I knew every stream, every rock formation within 5 miles of our house. I could identify tracks from deer, raccoon, possum, and fox. I knew which berries were safe to eat and which mushrooms to avoid. Her father had crafted her a simple wooden slingshot when she turned 7, and it became her constant companion. She practiced relentlessly until she could hit a tin can from 20 paces with remarkable consistency. This wasn't merely play. In the remote mountains, self-reliance wasn't optional, it was necessary. She learned to start fires, identify north without a compass, and find her way home from any point in the surrounding forest. Looking back now, I understand that these skills served her well on that July afternoon in 1979, the day the forest betrayed her. Diane's early years followed the natural rhythms of the mountains. Spring meant watching for the first trillium flowers to emerge from the forest floor and listening for the return of migrating birds. Summer brought wild blackberries that stained her fingers purple and swimming in the cold, clear streams that cut through the property. Fall transformed the mountains into a riot of color before winter stripped the trees bare and sometimes isolated the family completely when heavy snow made the dirt road impassable. My mother developed a deep connection to those woods. She knew when the first ramps would appear in spring and where the best fishing spots were along Henderson Creek that bisected their property. She tracked the seasonal movements of deer herds and recognized individual birds by their distinctive markings or behaviors. The forest was not merely a backdrop to her childhood, it was an intimate companion. Grandfather James, though frequently absent, gave Diane practical education during his time at home. He taught her to read weather patterns, to build simple shelters, and to respect the wilderness without fearing it. The forest doesn't hate you or love you, he would say. It simply exists. Understand it, and you'll never be truly lost. Grandmother Eleanor contributed her own form of knowledge, sharing Appalachian folk traditions that blended practical wisdom with cautionary tales. She taught Diane which plants had medicinal properties, how wild ginger could settle an upset stomach, how witch hazel could reduce swelling from insect bites. She also warned about the mountain's dangers, both natural and, occasionally, supernatural. Most of Grandma's stories were practical, my mother explained when I pressed her about these warnings. Don't wander too far because you might encounter a bear or fall into a ravine. But sometimes, especially on stormy nights when the wind howled through the pine trees, she'd mention other things that might be lurking in the deep woods. When I asked what things she meant, my mother would typically change the subject. I now understand why. Rebecca, 4 years younger than Diane, was her constant shadow during these formative years. Where Diane was bold and adventurous, Rebecca was cautious and observant. Together, they formed a complementary pair, Diane leading them into new territories, while Rebecca often noticed details her older sister missed in her enthusiasm. They built elaborate forts from fallen branches, created imaginary kingdoms in rocky outcroppings, and spent endless hours wading in the cool streams that laced through the property. Their childhood wasn't without modern comforts. The cabin had electricity, running water, and a telephone for emergencies, but television reception was poor at best, and the isolation meant entertainment largely came from books, imagination, and the natural world around them. My mother recalls these years with genuine fondness, describing a childhood that seemed to exist outside of time, connected to traditions and patterns of life that stretched back generations. I never felt deprived, she insisted. I felt privileged. My friends who lived in town seemed trapped to me, confined to streets and yards while I had an entire mountain range to explore. This freedom formed the core of her identity, until the day it became the source of her most profound terror. July 17, 1979, began like countless summer days before it. The morning air hung heavy with humidity, promising afternoon thunderstorms that would temporarily cool the mountain before leaving everything draped in steam. James had been away for 9 days on a buying trip that took him through Kentucky and into Ohio. Eleanor had the breakfast shift at the diner, which meant she'd left before dawn, leaving Diane to watch over Rebecca. The previous day, Rebecca had badly twisted her ankle while attempting to follow Diane up a particularly steep trail. The swelling hadn't subsided overnight, and by morning, Rebecca couldn't put weight on it without wincing in pain. Eleanor decided to take her to Dr. Marshall in town after finishing her shift, leaving Diane alone for the afternoon. Be careful, Eleanor cautioned before helping Rebecca into their weathered blue Chevrolet. Storms coming later. Don't go beyond Henderson Creek, and be back before dark. Standard instructions that Diane acknowledged with the casual confidence of a 9-year-old who considered herself practically grown. As the car disappeared down the dirt road, Diane felt the familiar thrill of complete freedom. She pulled her hair into a ponytail, filled a canteen with water, grabbed her slingshot and a cloth bag for collecting interesting rocks or other treasures, and set out toward the western section of the property. This area contained some of the oldest growth forest on their land, massive tulip poplars and white oaks that had stood for centuries, their broad canopies creating cathedral-like spaces beneath. Shafts of sunlight penetrated the leaves, illuminating patches of forest floor in golden spotlights that shifted with the breeze. The rich, earthy scent of decomposing vegetation mingled with the sharp sweetness of pine resin and wildflowers. Diane moved with the unconscious grace of someone intimately familiar with their environment. She stepped over exposed roots without looking down, ducked under low-hanging branches automatically, and navigated around poison ivy patches without breaking stride. Occasionally, she paused to shoot a small rock at a tree trunk, testing her aim and enjoying the solid thwack when she hit her target. She spent the morning exploring, eventually finding herself on a ridge overlooking a section of Henderson Creek she rarely visited. The creek widened here, creating a small pool before continuing its journey downslope. The water looked invitingly cool and clear. Diane decided this would be the perfect spot to spend the hottest part of the day. Making her way down to the creek took longer than expected. The slope was steeper than it appeared from above, forcing her to zigzag carefully between trees and use saplings as handholds to prevent sliding. By the time she reached the creek bank, sweat had soaked through her t-shirt and her stomach growled with hunger. She sat on a smooth rock beside the water, unpacking the sandwich she'd brought, peanut butter with her grandmother's homemade blackberry jam. As she ate, she noticed how the usual forest sounds seemed particularly vibrant here. Birds called to each other overhead, insects buzzed among wildflowers growing along the bank, and the creek itself provided a constant, soothing background of gentle splashing and gurgling. After lunch, Diane removed her sneakers and waded into the shallow edges of the pool. The water felt shockingly cold against her sun-warmed skin, but she quickly adjusted, delighting in the smooth stones beneath her feet and the tiny minnows that darted away from her shadow. Time slipped away as she explored the creek, finding crayfish hiding under rocks and collecting unusually shaped pebbles for her collection. The position of the sun warned her that afternoon was advancing, but she wasn't concerned. She knew her mother and Rebecca wouldn't return from town for hours yet, and despite the gathering clouds, the threatened storms hadn't materialized. She decided to refill her pebble supply for the slingshot before heading home. The creek bed offered perfect ammunition, smooth, round stones that fit comfortably in the leather pouch of her slingshot. As she knelt by the water's edge, selecting the best stones and placing them in her pocket, she failed to notice how the forest sounds had begun to change. Later, she would recognize this moment as the dividing line in her life, before and after. But in that instant, she was simply a 9-year-old girl enjoying a perfect summer day, unaware that something was watching her from the opposite bank. The change in the forest atmosphere came gradually, then suddenly, like falling asleep. One moment, Diane was absorbed in selecting stones from the creek bed. The next, she became aware of an unsettling silence that had crept over her surroundings. The birds had stopped their calling. The insects no longer buzzed. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. My mother described this moment with remarkable clarity, even decades later. It wasn't just quiet, it was wrong. The forest never goes completely silent. There's always something making noise. But suddenly nothing, like someone had pressed a mute button on the whole world. She straightened up slowly, her hand instinctively tightening around her slingshot. The hairs on her arms stood up despite the humid air. She scanned the surrounding trees, expecting to see a black bear or perhaps a coyote, natural predators whose presence might explain the forest's sudden silence. What she saw instead defied her understanding of the natural world. Across the creek, partially obscured by a thicket of rhododendron, stood a figure. At first glance, her mind tried to categorize it as human, perhaps a hunter or hiker who had strayed onto their property. But as her eyes adjusted and her brain processed what she was seeing, she realized this was something else entirely. The figure was massive, far larger than any man she had ever seen. It appeared to be kneeling or crouching at the creek's edge, partially hidden by vegetation. Dark hair covered its body, not clothing, but actual hair, thick and matted in places. The coloration wasn't uniform black, but varied from dark brown to reddish tints, where sunlight hit it through the canopy. Diane froze, unable to move as her mind raced to make sense of what she was seeing. The creature remained motionless as well, and for several heartbeats, they existed in a terrible tableau of mutual observation. Then it moved. A massive arm reached out to brace against a nearby tree trunk. The movement was deliberate, almost careful. Diane could see muscles shifting beneath the hair, powerful muscles that spoke of immense strength. The hand that gripped the tree had opposable thumbs, she would later recall, but the fingers were thicker, the nails darker and more claw-like than human nails. She wanted to run, but remained rooted in place, her body refusing to obey her mind's increasingly frantic commands. The creature tilted its head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of its face, a face that haunted her nightmares for years afterward. It wasn't a human face, but it wasn't an animal's either, she told me, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper even in the safety of her living room decades later. The eyes were what got me. They were deep-set under a heavy brow, dark but intelligent. They weren't animal eyes. There was something looking at me from behind those eyes. Something that was thinking. The creature's gaze locked with hers across the creek, and in that moment, Diane felt utterly exposed, as if those eyes could see through her, could read her thoughts and know her fears. An involuntary whimper escaped her throat. The sound seemed to trigger something. The creature's chest expanded as it drew in a breath, and then it vocalized, a sound my mother struggled to describe even years later. It wasn't a growl or a roar like a bear. It was purposeful. It started low, almost like a human trying to clear their throat, but then it built into something that vibrated through the air. I felt it more than heard it, like standing next to a speaker at a concert. It pressed against my chest and made my ears hurt. The vocalization echoed through the small valley, bouncing off the surrounding ridges before fading. In the silence that followed, Diane realized she had fallen to her knees, her hands pressed against her ears. When she looked up, the creature was standing. What had seemed large before now became truly massive. It unfolded from its crouching position to stand upright on two legs. My mother estimated it stood at least 9 feet tall, possibly taller, its broad shoulders and barrel chest giving it an imposing silhouette against the forest backdrop. "That's when I finally found the ability to move," she said. "Something in my brain just snapped, and suddenly I was running." She bolted away from the creek, scrambling up the steep bank she had so carefully navigated earlier. Roots tore at her hands as she pulled herself upward. Branches whipped across her face, but she barely noticed. Behind her, she heard a second vocalization, louder than the first, with a different cadence that somehow conveyed anger or challenge. Diane ran blindly, her only thought to put distance between herself and the creature. She abandoned the trails, crashing through underbrush and thickets, ignoring the scratches and cuts that accumulated on her exposed arms and legs. Twice she fell, the second time tumbling down a short incline and striking her head against a fallen log. Stars burst in her vision, but terror drove her back to her feet. How long she ran, she couldn't later say. Time distorted in her panic. The gathering storm clouds had darkened the forest, making it difficult to maintain her bearings. At some point, she realized she had become disoriented, no longer certain of the direction toward home. She forced herself to stop, pressing her back against a large oak tree as she gasped for breath. Blood trickled from numerous scratches on her legs, and her clothing was torn in several places. She strained to listen for any sound of pursuit, but heard nothing beyond her own pounding heartbeat and ragged breathing. As the initial surge of adrenaline began to fade, reason slowly reasserted itself. She needed to find her way home. Looking up, she sought gaps in the canopy that might reveal the position of the sun, an orientation technique her father had taught her. Through one such gap, she spotted darker clouds gathering. A storm was approaching. Using the cloud's movement to determine direction, she oriented herself and began moving with more purpose, still hurrying, but no longer in blind panic. Every few steps, she paused to listen, terrified of hearing heavy footsteps following her trail. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the first drops of rain began to filter through the canopy. The cooling moisture felt like a blessing on her overheated skin, helping to clear her mind further. The rain also obscured sounds, however, making it impossible to know if she was being followed. After what seemed like hours, but was likely less than 45 minutes, Diane caught sight of a familiar lightning-struck pine that marked one of the boundaries of their regular exploration area. Relief flooded through her as she realized she was less than half a mile from home. The rain had intensified, turning the forest floor slippery and treacherous. Twice more she fell, the second time sliding several feet down a muddy incline. By the time she staggered into the clearing surrounding their cabin, she was soaked to the skin, covered in mud, her legs streaked with blood from numerous scratches and cuts. The blue Chevrolet wasn't in the driveway. Her mother and sister hadn't yet returned from town. Diane stumbled up the porch steps and collapsed against the front door, fumbling with trembling hands to retrieve the key from its hiding place beneath a flower pot. Once inside, she slammed the door shut and engaged every lock, then systematically moved through the house, closing and locking all the windows despite the summer heat. Only then, secure within familiar walls, did the full emotional impact of what she had experienced crash over her. When Eleanor and Rebecca returned from town 2 hours later, they found Diane huddled in a corner of the living room, a kitchen knife clutched in her hand, her eyes fixed on the windows. Her clothes were torn and muddy, her legs covered in dried blood from numerous scratches, her hair tangled with leaves and twigs. "What happened to you?" Eleanor gasped, rushing to her daughter's side. Diane opened her mouth to explain but found herself unable to articulate what she had seen. How could she describe something that defied categorization? The words that finally emerged were simply, "I fell from a tree." Eleanor clearly didn't believe this explanation, but after checking Diane for serious injuries and finding none beyond superficial scratches and bruises, she didn't press the issue. She helped Diane into a warm bath, gently washed the mud and blood away, applied antiseptic to the worst scratches, and prepared her favorite dinner, grilled cheese sandwiches with tomato soup. That night, as thunder rumbled outside and rain pattered against the roof, Diane lay awake in the bedroom she shared with Rebecca, listening intently for any sound that might indicate the creature had followed her home. Every creak of the cabin's wooden structure, every gust of wind that rattled the windows, sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through her system. Rebecca, her ankle propped on a pillow, watched her sister with concern. "What really happened today?" she whispered after their mother had gone to bed. Diane considered telling her sister the truth, but feared Rebecca wouldn't believe her, or worse, would believe her and be frightened. "I got lost in the storm," she said finally. "I panicked and ran through some brambles." Rebecca studied her face in the dim light filtering through their curtains. "You're different," she said simply, a statement rather than a question. Diane couldn't argue with this assessment. She felt different, as if the foundations of her world had shifted. The forest that had always been her sanctuary now seemed filled with threat and uncertainty. Sleep finally claimed her near dawn, bringing dreams of dark eyes watching her from the trees. The following days established a pattern that would persist for the remainder of that summer. Diane refused to venture into the woods alone, insisting that Rebecca accompany her even on short excursions to the garden at the edge of the clearing. She startled at unexpected sounds and developed a habit of constantly scanning the tree line. Her slingshot, once a toy, became a talisman she carried everywhere, though she understood its inadequacy against what she had encountered. When James returned from his buying trip, he immediately noticed the change in his daughter. Where once she had begged him for stories of his travels, she now seemed distracted and anxious. When he suggested they go fishing at Henderson Creek, she invented excuses to avoid it. "Did something happen while I was gone?" he asked Eleanor one evening, his voice low to prevent the girls from overhearing. "Something spooked her in the woods," Eleanor replied, glancing toward the living room where Diane sat reading, her back deliberately turned toward the windows. "She says she fell from a tree, but—" She left the sentence unfinished. James tried to draw Diane out during a walk around the perimeter of their clearing, carefully staying within sight of the cabin at her insistence. "These mountains hold secrets," he said, "but most of them aren't dangerous if you understand them." Diane considered telling him then. He would believe her, wouldn't he? He knew these mountains better than anyone. But the words caught in her throat. What if he didn't believe her? What if he thought she was making up stories for attention? Worse, what if he did believe her and decided to hunt for the creature? The thought of her father confronting those intelligent eyes filled her with dread. "I'm just being silly," she said finally. "I got scared in a thunderstorm." James studied her face, clearly unconvinced but unwilling to push further. "Well, the woods will be waiting when you're ready to return to them." But Diane wasn't sure she would ever be ready. As July gave way to August, she developed elaborate systems to avoid being alone outdoors. She volunteered to help Eleanor with indoor chores she had previously avoided. She developed a sudden interest in cooking and sewing, activities that kept her safely within walls. When Rebecca's ankle healed and she wanted to resume their explorations, Diane steered them toward the front of the property, away from Henderson Creek and the western woods. At night, she insisted on leaving a light burning in their bedroom, much to Rebecca's annoyance. She positioned her bed to face the window, unable to sleep if her back was turned to it. Often, she woke gasping from nightmares she couldn't or wouldn't describe to her increasingly concerned family. By summer's end, Diane had constructed a new normal for herself, one built around vigilance and restricted movement. When school resumed in September, she felt a profound relief at having structured days spent in the brick building in town, surrounded by other children and adults, safely removed from the forest and its secrets. The creature never returned to their property, at least not that anyone observed. But its singular appearance had permanently altered Diane's relationship with the natural world and, in many ways, with herself. As months stretched into years, Diane maintained her silence about what she had seen that July afternoon. The incident became encapsulated within her, a secret core around which she constructed her adolescent and adult identity. Outwardly, she appeared to recover from whatever had frightened her in the woods. She participated in school activities, made friends, even occasionally joined family hiking trips, though she always insisted they stay on marked trails and travel in groups. Inwardly, however, the encounter remained vivid, undiminished by time. Certain triggers could instantly transport her back to that moment by the creek: the particular quality of silence before a summer storm, the smell of wet earth and vegetation, the sound of running water over stones. When these sensory cues aligned, she would find herself frozen, heart racing, as the memory surfaced with visceral immediacy. By her teenage years, Diane had researched enough to put a name to what she believed she had encountered: Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or one of the many regional variations of the legend. She secretly consumed books and articles on cryptozoology, comparing reported sightings with her own experience, noting the similarities and differences. Some accounts seemed credible and aligned closely with what she had witnessed. Others struck her as obvious fabrications or misidentifications. She developed a critical eye for these distinctions, becoming an unacknowledged expert on a subject she never discussed. Her silence stemmed from multiple sources. Fear of ridicule was certainly one factor. By the mid-1980s, Bigfoot had become a cultural punchline, featured in sensationalist tabloids alongside stories of Elvis sightings and alien abductions. Diane, now a serious student with college aspirations, couldn't risk her reputation by associating herself with such fringe beliefs. More profound was her sense that the experience was somehow private, a moment of contact with something ancient and separate from ordinary human experience. Sharing it would inevitably diminish it, reducing something profound to mere anecdote. There was also an element of protection in her silence. As long as she told no one, she didn't have to defend the reality of what she had seen. The memory remained pure, uncontaminated by others' interpretations or explanations. When she left for college in 1988, Diane made a conscious decision to reinvent herself. She would no longer be the strange, watchful girl who startled at unexpected sounds and avoided walking alone at dusk. At the University of Tennessee, she cultivated a persona of academic dedication with a side interest in geology, a scientifically respectable way to collect and classify the interesting rocks and minerals that had fascinated her since childhood. She rarely returned to the family cabin, citing academic commitments even during breaks. When she did visit, she noticed how the property had changed. James had cleared additional land for a larger garden. The forest had receded slightly from their boundaries, and development had begun to encroach on the once isolated area as vacation homes appeared on neighboring ridges. These changes brought a mixture of relief and sadness. The wilderness that had both nurtured and terrified her was slowly being domesticated, made safe for weekend visitors who would never know its deeper secrets. In her junior year of college, Diane met Michael, my father, in an environmental science elective. Their shared interest in natural systems drew them together, though Diane was careful to focus their outdoor activities on coastal areas and plains rather than densely forested mountains. When they married in 1993, she suggested they settle in eastern North Carolina, where Michael had been offered a position with a conservation organization. The landscape there, flat, agricultural, with forests of pine plantations rather than ancient mixed hardwoods, felt controllable in a way the Tennessee mountains never had. I was born the following year, followed by my brother 2 years later. As we grew, Diane proved to be a cautiously encouraging mother, balancing safety concerns with opportunities for exploration. She taught us to identify plants and animals, to read weather patterns, to navigate using natural landmarks, all skills her father had taught her. But unlike her childhood experience, our explorations were always supervised, always bounded by clear limits and safety protocols. "The world is full of wonders," she would tell us, "but some wonders deserve respectful distance." At the time, I interpreted this as standard parental caution. Only later would I understand the depths from which this philosophy emerged. For nearly 40 years, my mother kept her experience secret. She never spoke of it to her parents, her sister, my father, or to me and my brother. The encounter remained sealed within her, influencing her choices and perspectives in ways we couldn't recognize because we lacked the context to understand them. What finally broke this decades-long silence was, ironically, my casual mention of a hiking trip I planned to take with friends in the Appalachian Mountains, not far from her childhood home. I was visiting her in April 2018, helping sort through belongings as she prepared to downsize from the family home to a retirement community following my father's death the previous year. We were in the attic, opening boxes that hadn't been touched in years, when I mentioned the upcoming trip. I expected no particular reaction, perhaps some practical advice about weather conditions or trail recommendations. Instead, my mother went very still, her hands freezing in the act of sorting through old photographs. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice so changed that I looked up in alarm. "Something I should have told you years ago." We moved to the kitchen, where she made tea with deliberate, measured movements that I recognized as her way of composing herself. Then, sitting across from me at the table where our family had shared thousands of meals, she began to speak. The story emerged haltingly at first, then with increasing fluency, as decades of silence gave way to release. She recounted the events of that July day in 1979 with astonishing detail. The quality of light filtering through the trees, the temperature of the creek water, the precise sound of the creature's vocalization, the intelligence in its eyes. I listened without interruption, recognizing the profound significance of this moment. Here was the missing piece that explained so many of my mother's peculiarities. Her insistence on our always hiking in groups, her subtle tension when visiting densely wooded areas, her preference for homes with minimal surrounding forest. When she finished, silence filled the kitchen. Outside, spring rain tapped against the windows, creating a gentle backdrop to the momentous revelation that hung in the air between us. "You believe me, don't you?" she finally asked, vulnerability evident in her voice. In that moment, she looked younger somehow, as if sharing the story had temporarily transported her back to that 9-year-old girl by the creek. Did I believe her? The rational part of my mind cataloged alternative explanations. A bear standing on hind legs, an unusually tall human with a beard, a child's imagination transforming an ordinary encounter into something extraordinary. Yet I couldn't dismiss the consistency and clarity of her account, nor the evident sincerity with which she shared it. "I believe you experienced something profound," I said carefully. "Something that defied your understanding of the world." She studied my face, clearly assessing whether my response represented belief or diplomatic evasion. Whatever she saw apparently satisfied her. "I've never told anyone before," she said, "not even your father." "Why now?" I asked. "Because you're going to those mountains," she replied. "And while I don't think you'll encounter what I encountered, I need you to understand why certain precautions matter." She proceeded to give me practical advice. Never hike alone, avoid creek beds during the quietest part of the afternoon, trust the sudden silence of the forest as a warning sign, always have multiple routes of retreat planned. Advice that would have seemed paranoid without the context she had just provided. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you," she emphasized. "The mountains aren't malevolent. They're just more complex than most people realize." In the days that followed, we revisited the story multiple times. Each conversation revealed additional details she had suppressed for decades. How she had secretly mapped the area of her encounter and avoided it during subsequent forest explorations. How she had studied indigenous legends about forest beings after leaving for college. How she had occasionally spotted unusual track patterns during family hiking trips, but had deliberately steered us away without explanation. When I asked why she had maintained her silence for so long, her answer was revealing. "Once you've seen something that most people insist cannot exist, you face an impossible choice. Either you question your own perception, your own sanity, or you accept that the world is fundamentally different from what you've been taught. Neither option offers comfort." My hiking trip to the Appalachians proceeded as planned that May, though with a heightened awareness shaped by my mother's revelation. I found myself attuned to the forest in ways I hadn't been before, noting subtle shifts in wildlife sounds, watching the tree line with greater attention, feeling a distinct unease when our group approached creek crossings in late afternoon. We encountered nothing unusual, just the expected beauty of ancient mountains in spring, with wildflowers carpeting the forest floor and new leaves creating a vibrant green canopy overhead. Yet I couldn't shake the sense that I was being permitted to witness only the surface of something much deeper and more complex. Upon my return, I began researching historical accounts of similar encounters in the Appalachian region. The literature was extensive but uneven. Credible first-hand accounts mixed with obvious hoaxes, scientific analysis alongside sensationalist speculation. Indigenous traditions from Cherokee and other Appalachian tribes described various forest beings with characteristics similar to what my mother had described, though filtered through cultural and spiritual frameworks that differed from modern cryptozoological approaches. I found myself drawn particularly to the anthropological perspectives. The notion that legends of wild men and forest beings might represent cultural memories of real but rare encounters with relict hominid populations or unusual natural phenomena. These scholarly approaches offered a middle ground between total dismissal and uncritical acceptance. When I shared some of these findings with my mother, she listened with interest, but without the need for validation that might have characterized someone less certain of their experience. "I don't need proof," she said simply. "I know what I saw." Her certainty gave me pause. Throughout my life, I had known my mother as rational, practical, and skeptical of extraordinary claims. She approached the world with scientific curiosity rather than superstition, This made her unwavering conviction all the more compelling. In the years since her revelation, our relationship has deepened around this shared secret. We've had countless conversations exploring the implications of her encounter, not just the question of what exactly she saw that day, but the more profound issue of how we integrate experiences that challenge our fundamental understanding of reality. Now, as I write this account, I find myself grappling with the same questions that haunted my mother for decades. What exists in the remote corners of our world, in the deepest shadows of ancient forests? How do we reconcile unexplainable experiences with our need for a coherent, rational worldview? What is lost when we dismiss accounts like my mother's as mere imagination or misidentification? I have no definitive answers. The forest keeps its secrets, revealing them only in rare, fleeting moments to those who happen to be in the right place at precisely the right, or perhaps wrong, time. What remains certain is the profound impact of that July afternoon on my mother's life, and by extension, on mine. A single encounter beside a mountain creek altered the course of her development, influenced her choices of where and how to live, affected her parenting philosophy, and created within her a division between public knowledge and private truth that she maintained for 4 decades. I sometimes wonder how different her life might have been without that encounter, whether she would have remained more deeply connected to the mountains she loved, whether she would have pursued different academic or career paths, whether she would have raised me and my brother with more freedom to explore unsupervised. But such counterfactuals offer little insight. What matters is the reality she experienced and how she chose to respond to it. With caution, but not paralysis. With respect for the unknown, but not fear. With silence, but not denial. As my mother settles into her retirement community, surrounded by carefully landscaped grounds where nature is tamed and predictable, I notice how she still positions her chair to face the window, how her eyes still scan the tree line at dusk, how she still grows quiet when thunderstorms approach. Some experiences leave permanent imprints. Some memories never fade. And some encounters, however brief, reveal glimpses of a world more vast and mysterious than we typically acknowledge. The forest my mother knew as a child continues to change. Development encroaches further each year, fragmenting wildlife habitats and reducing truly remote areas. Perhaps the creature she encountered has retreated deeper into the remaining wilderness. Perhaps it was already rare in 1979 and has since vanished entirely. Or perhaps it still moves silently through the ancient hollows and ridges, occasionally crossing paths with humans who, like my mother, find their understanding of the world irrevocably altered. I don't know if I'll ever have my own encounter. Part of me hopes I will, that I might experience firsthand what my mother described. Another part hopes I won't, that I'll be spared the burden of knowledge that cannot be comfortably shared. What I do know is that I'll return to those mountains, walking the trails with open eyes and an open mind, listening for the sudden silence that might herald something extraordinary. And whether I encounter anything unusual or not, I'll remember my mother's story, not as folklore or family legend, but as lived experience passed from one generation to the next, an inheritance more valuable than any material possession. Some would call this story a tall tale, a product of imagination or misperception. Perhaps they're right. But I prefer to believe that the world still holds mysteries beyond our current understanding, that the maps of our knowledge still contain regions marked, "Here be dragons," awaiting further exploration. After all, the truest thing my mother ever taught me was this: the most important discoveries often happen not when we find what we're looking for, but when we encounter something we never expected to find. Journal entry, August 12, 2002. The weathered pages of this leather-bound journal have become my most reliable companion on these solitary journeys. Professional truck driver by trade, wanderer by choice. That's how I've come to define myself these past few years. The name's Dean Coulter, and what follows is my account of events that transpired in the shadow of Mount Shasta during what began as a routine solo expedition in my 1997 Gulfstream RV. For those who might someday read these words, understand that I've documented everything exactly as it occurred. No embellishments, no fabrications, just the cold, hard truth of what happens when you venture too deep into places that don't want to be found. Northern California in August carries a particular charm. the towering pines standing sentinel over winding roads, the crisp mountain air carrying the scent of wild sage. After 15 years hauling freight across the country, I'd saved enough to afford these extended breaks from civilization. The company calls it a sabbatical. I call it salvation. My sister Caroline worried about these trips. "Dean, one of these days you're going to drop off the grid, and we'll never find you," she'd said during our last phone call. I'd laughed it off, assuring her that my satellite phone worked just fine, even in the most remote locations. What I couldn't tell her was that disappearing, at least temporarily, was precisely the point. The divorce had been finalized 6 months prior. 22 years of marriage dissolved in a courtroom that smelled of furniture polish and regret. Beth got the house, half my pension, and custody of our memories. I got the RV and an unrelenting silence that followed me everywhere. The highway stretched before me like a promise as I headed north on US 97. My intended destination was Olympic National Park in Washington, but the beauty of having your home on wheels is the freedom to change course on a whim. When I spotted the unmarked gravel turnoff just beyond Weed, California, something compelled me to take it. The narrow road wound through increasingly dense forest, climbing steadily in elevation. According to my well-worn atlas, I was skirting the eastern boundary of the Shasta Trinity National Forest. After about 20 minutes of cautious driving, the trees parted to reveal a small clearing, not an official campground, but rather a flat, open space beside a gently flowing creek. Perfect. No registration required, no camp hosts checking in, no neighboring RVs with generators humming through the night. Just me, the mountains, and blessed solitude. I parked facing east to catch the morning sun, deployed the stabilizers, and stepped outside. The air carried a pristine quality that made each breath feel like the first real one I'd taken in months. A family of deer grazed at the forest's edge, unbothered by my presence. Chickadees flitted between branches overhead, nature carrying on, indifferent to the human observer in its midst. That first evening, I sat beside a small campfire, nursing a glass of whiskey as the stars emerged in breathtaking clarity. The Milky Way stretched across the sky in a swath of cosmic dust that city dwellers never truly see. I felt small beneath that vast expanse, yet somehow connected to something larger than myself. The next day passed in peaceful monotony. I hiked a game trail that followed the creek upstream, discovering a series of small waterfalls cascading over moss-covered rocks. I read Hemingway on a sun-warmed boulder, caught 2 rainbow trout for dinner, and watched the sunset paint the clouds in shades of amber and violet. The second night mirrored the first. Fire, whiskey, stars. I fell asleep to the gentle symphony of crickets and the distant hooting of an owl. All was right with the world, until it wasn't. It began so subtly I almost missed it. A gradual diminishing of the forest's nocturnal chorus during my 3rd day at camp. By nightfall on August 14th, the change had become impossible to ignore. The woods had fallen unnaturally quiet. Wildlife doesn't simply go silent without cause. In my years of outdoor experience, such silence typically preceded one of 2 things: a significant weather event or the presence of a predator. The sky remained clear, with not a hint of approaching storms. That left the second possibility hanging in the air like a promise. I secured the RV that evening with more care than usual, checking the locks twice before settling in with a book. Sleep came reluctantly, and when it did arrive, it brought with it dreams of being watched by eyes I couldn't see from the darkness between the trees. I woke suddenly at 3:17 a.m. The glowing digits of the bedside clock burned into my retinas as I lay motionless, straining to identify what had disturbed my sleep. The RV had grown cold despite the mild August night, my breath forming visible clouds in the moonlight filtering through the blinds. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps circling my vehicle. Not the light, 4-point steps of deer, not the shuffling gait of a scavenging bear. These were deliberate, measured, bipedal. The sound of a person walking slowly around my RV in the middle of the night, miles from any marked trail or campground. I remained frozen in bed, heartbeat thundering in my ears as the footsteps completed a circuit, paused at my door, then continued around for a second pass. The metal skin of the Gulf Stream creaked slightly, as though something was dragging its fingers along the exterior. After what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, the footsteps receded into the forest. The temperature gradually returned to normal, though sleep remained elusive for the remainder of the night. Morning brought rationalization. Probably another hiker who'd gotten turned around, I told myself. They'd seen my RV and hoped for assistance, but thought better of waking a stranger at that hour. The cold? Just a normal mountain temperature fluctuation. These reassurances rang hollow even as I voiced them to the empty air of my kitchenette while brewing coffee. The forest remained unusually quiet as dawn broke over the eastern ridgeline, casting long shadows across my campsite. I couldn't have known then that August 15th would become the day that changed everything, the day that would draw a clear line between the life I had known and whatever remained afterward. The day I would meet the walker. A heavy fog clung to the forest floor on the morning of August 15th, tendrils of mist winding between tree trunks like spectral fingers. I sipped coffee on the RV's small exterior deck, scanning the surrounding woodland for any sign of last night's visitor. The ground, softened by recent rain, should have held footprints, yet I found none, not even my own from the previous day's activities. The absence of evidence proved more unsettling than any footprint could have been. By mid-morning, the fog had burned away, revealing a day of exceptional clarity, the kind of pristine beauty that makes you forget momentary unease. I decided to put this strange night behind me and explore further into the forest. I packed a day bag with essentials: water, energy bars, first aid kit, topographic map, compass, and my father's old hunting knife. More for utility than protection, though its weight against my hip provided comfort nonetheless. The trail I chose appeared little used, meandering northwest along a ridgeline that promised views of Mount Shasta's snow-capped peak. As I walked, I made mental notes of landmarks: a lightning-struck pine, a distinctive boulder formation, a small meadow carpeted with wildflowers, to ensure I could find my way back. 2 hours into my hike, I realized what had been bothering me since setting out: the continuing silence. No birdsong accompanied my journey. No squirrels chattered from overhead branches. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath, creating an auditory vacuum that amplified my footsteps to thunderous proportions. Anyone who spent significant time in wilderness knows that nature is never truly silent. The absence of sound in a forest indicates disruption, something fundamental thrown out of balance. I paused at a stream crossing to refill my water bottle, listening intently for any sound beyond the gentle gurgle of water over stones. Nothing. The hairs on my arms stood at attention despite the warm afternoon sun. "Hello?" I called out experimentally, my voice jarringly loud in the silent woods. The forest swallowed my greeting without echo or response. I should have turned back then. Every instinct screamed warnings, yet curiosity pulled me forward like an invisible tether. Just a little further, I told myself. Just to that next ridge. The temperature began to drop as I continued, a gradual cooling that felt out of place for mid-August. My breath fogged before me as I climbed higher, navigating around fallen logs and over increasingly rocky terrain. The trees grew more sparse, revealing patches of sky between their sprawling crowns. That's when the smell hit me. A metallic, coppery scent that instantly triggered primal alarm bells. Blood. And not the clean smell of a hunter's recent kill, but the fetid odor of blood left to spoil under the sun. I crested the ridge and found myself looking down into a small basin. What I saw there halted me mid-stride, one foot suspended in air before slowly returning to earth. Below me lay the remains of a campsite. Not an RV setup like mine, but a proper backcountry camp with a tent, or what was left of one. The olive-green canvas had been shredded, aluminum tent poles bent at impossible angles as though crushed by enormous pressure. A sleeping bag lay 20 feet away, ripped open, its down-filling scattered like dirty snow across the clearing. But it was the central area that drew my horrified gaze. A large dark stain marred the pine needle floor, the earth soaked through with what could only be blood. Too much blood for someone to have survived its loss. Yet there was no body. Personal effects lay scattered in a rough circle around the bloodstain. A flashlight, a dog-eared paperback swollen from moisture, a blue flannel shirt stiff with dried blood, a single hiking boot. I fumbled for my satellite phone with trembling hands, only to find no signal. Of course, the surrounding peaks must have been blocking transmission. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. "Anyone there? Anyone need help?" The words felt inadequate, even foolish. Whatever had happened here wasn't recent. The blood had darkened to the color of rust, and there were signs that small animals had been picking through the scattered supplies. Professional instinct took over. I needed to document this, then get back to civilization and report it to authorities. I removed my digital camera from my backpack and began photographing the scene, careful not to disturb anything that might serve as evidence. As I captured a shot of what appeared to be claw marks gouged into a nearby tree trunk, a twig snapped in the forest beyond the destroyed campsite. I whirled toward the sound, camera still raised. The thing that stood at the forest's edge defied immediate categorization. My mind cycled through possible identifications. Bear? No. Person in a costume? Impossible, not here. Some unknown primate? Nothing documented in these mountains could match what I was seeing. It stood easily 7 feet tall, its powerful frame covered in thick, matted fur the color of wet slate. Not the brown or black of a bear, but a deep charcoal gray with silver-tipped guard hairs catching the dappled sunlight. Though it stood on 2 legs, its posture wasn't fully upright like a human's, but slightly hunched, with disproportionately long arms hanging at its sides. Its hands, and they were hands, not paws, ended in curved claws that seemed capable of the devastation I just documented. But it was the face that stopped my breath. Not quite human, not quite animal, but a disturbing amalgamation of both. A heavy brow ridge-shadowed eyes that glowed with amber luminescence, reflecting light like a nocturnal predator's. Its nose was broad and flat, nostrils flaring as it scented the air. Its mouth, a grim slash beneath that nose, was closed, but I could see the outline of teeth pressing against black lips. Those eyes held an intelligence that transcended animal instinct, a sentience, an awareness that assessed me with calculated deliberation. We stood frozen in mutual appraisal, neither moving, the camera forgotten in my grasp. Time stretched like warm taffy, seconds extending into what felt like minutes. Then it tilted its head, a disturbingly human gesture of curiosity. Every survival instinct screamed at me to run, yet some deeper wisdom understood that turning my back on this creature would be fatal. Predator's chase. This was a predator unlike any I'd encountered. With agonizing slowness, I lowered the camera, maintaining eye contact. My free hand moved incrementally toward the knife at my belt, a laughably inadequate defense, but the only one available. The creature's gaze tracked this movement. A low rumble emanated from its chest, not quite a growl, more like the sound of distant thunder. "I'm not here to harm anything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm leaving now." Speaking felt ridiculous, yet natural at the same time. Whatever this being was, it understood territory and intrusion. I needed to communicate my intention to withdraw. For one terrifying moment, it took a half-step forward, powerful muscles bunching beneath its fur. My fingers closed around the knife handle, knowing with certainty that I would never have time to draw it. Then, with a fluidity that belied its size, the creature turned and loped into the forest, disappearing among the trees with astonishing speed and silence. I remained rooted in place, lungs burning before I remembered to breathe. The creature had gone, but it hadn't felt like retreat. Rather, it seemed like a decision, a choice to let me leave. This time, I heeded my instincts. I backed away from the destroyed camp, maintaining my focus on the spot where the creature had vanished, then turned and half jogged, half stumbled down the path toward my RV, checking frequently over my shoulder. The silence of the forest now felt oppressive, pregnant with malevolent potential. Each shadow concealed threats, each rustling leaf signaled pursuit. The landmarks I'd noted earlier seemed unfamiliar, as though the forest itself had rearranged during my absence. I reached my RV as the sun dipped toward the western horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across my campsite. Without pausing to collect my few outside belongings, I unlocked the door, threw myself inside, and engaged every lock. Only then, in the relative safety of my mobile fortress, did the shaking begin, a full-body tremor that rattled my teeth and turned my limbs to water. I collapsed onto the small sofa, gasping for breath as though I'd sprinted the entire way back. What had I seen? What could possibly explain the destruction at that campsite? And most disturbing of all, why had it let me go? Night approached rapidly, darkness seeping through the forest like spilled ink. I drew all blinds, turned on every light in the RV, and retrieved the shotgun from its locked case beneath my bed, a precaution I'd never before needed in all my years of solo travel. The night of August 15th stretched before me like an endless void, with only my racing thoughts and the loaded Remington for company. Darkness transformed the RV's windows into black mirrors, reflecting my haggard face back at me as I paced the confined space, shotgun cradled in trembling hands. Each creak of settling metal, each whisper of wind against the exterior sent fresh adrenaline surging through my system. I'd seen something impossible. Something that shouldn't exist in the rational world I'd inhabited for 54 years. Yet the images captured on my digital camera confirmed I hadn't hallucinated the destroyed campsite. The photos didn't include the creature. It had appeared after I lowered the camera, but the evidence of its destructive capability was undeniable. At 9:17 p.m., the generator sputtered and died. I'd filled it with fresh fuel just that morning, enough for at least 12 hours of continuous operation. Its sudden failure plunged the RV into darkness broken only by moonlight filtering through the blinds. Just a mechanical issue, I muttered, attempting to convince myself as I fumbled for the flashlight in my emergency kit. Nothing more. The beam cut through the darkness, providing little comfort as I moved to the door. The generator was external, mounted on the RV's rear. Checking it meant going outside. My hand rested on the door handle, unwilling to complete the motion that would expose me to the night. Through the door's small window, I could see the clearing bathed in ethereal moonlight, seemingly peaceful. No movement disturbed the silvery tableau. I took a deep breath, tightened my grip on the shotgun, and cracked the door open. The forest's silence rushed in like a physical force. No chirping insects, no rustling leaves, just absolute suffocating stillness. The air carried a cold bite that stung my lungs and crystallized my exhaled breath. 3 steps would take me to the RV's rear. 3 steps across open ground, exposed and vulnerable. 1. The gravel crunched beneath my boot, the sound obscenely loud in the quiet. 2. Halfway there, senses hyper-alert, scanning the tree line where darkness gathered like spilled oil. 3. I rounded the corner to find the generator's access panel open, its interior a mess of severed wires and mangled components. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was deliberate sabotage. A low rumble emerged from the forest directly ahead of me, the same thunderous growl I'd heard earlier that day. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty space between black tree trunks. Then movement, not from ahead where I pointed the light, but behind me. I whirled, bringing the shotgun to bear, only to find the clearing empty. The RV door swung gently in the night breeze. The door I'd left barely ajar now stood wide open, the interior dark and uninviting. Something had circled behind me while keeping my attention fixed forward. The strategic intelligence this implied chilled me more deeply than the night air. Whatever this creature was, it wasn't operating on animal instinct alone. It was thinking, planning, hunting. I backed toward the open door, unwilling to turn my back on the forest, yet equally unwilling to remain exposed. The flashlight beam swept erratically across the clearing as my hand shook. That's when I saw them. Tracks in the damp earth near the RV steps. Not the split hoof prints of deer or the round impressions of bear paws. These were elongated, 5-toed prints with clear claw marks extending from each digit. They measured easily 15 inches from heel to toe. The tracks led directly to my open door. It had been inside my RV. Cold sweat trickled down my spine as I eased up the steps, shotgun raised, flashlight illuminating the interior in bouncing, disjointed patches. Everything appeared untouched. No destruction, no obvious signs of intrusion. Yet something felt fundamentally wrong, like finding a stranger sitting in your home's darkest corner. The bathroom door stood ajar, the small space beyond shrouded in shadow. I approached slowly, pulse hammering in my throat. The narrow beam revealed nothing as I nudged the door wider with the shotgun barrel. Empty. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by renewed tension as my flashlight caught a reflection in the bathroom mirror. 2 amber points of light hovering at the height of my shoulders. Standing behind me. I spun, finger tightening on the trigger, but the space behind me contained nothing but shadows. My mind was conjuring threats from darkness and fear. Yet when I turned back to the mirror, a message had been drawn in the condensation on the glass. Get out. 2 simple words, finger traced by something that shouldn't possess the intelligence for written language. The implication sent my thoughts spiraling toward panic. I backed out of the bathroom, sweeping the flashlight across every corner of the RV. Nothing waited in the shadows, yet the sense of violation remained palpable. Something had been here, moved through my space, touched my possessions, left its warning. It wanted me gone. The realization brought unexpected clarity. I needed to leave, immediately. No amount of curiosity or stubbornness justified remaining in this forest another night. I could reach the main highway in 40 minutes if I drove carefully in the dark. I stowed the shotgun within easy reach of the driver's seat, secured loose items for travel, and slid behind the wheel. The engine turned over on the first try, its rumble obscenely loud in the silent night. Headlights carved twin cones through the darkness as I released the parking brake and began the careful process of backing out of the clearing. The RV moved perhaps 10 feet before a sickening lurch brought it to a halt. I pressed harder on the accelerator. The wheels spun, gaining no traction. Something was preventing my departure. With trembling hands, I cut the engine and retrieved the flashlight and shotgun. What I found outside drained the remaining warmth from my body. All 4 tires had been slashed, the rubber hanging in ribbons from the rims. Not cut with a knife, but torn by claws powerful enough to rend vulcanized rubber like tissue paper. The creature hadn't simply warned me to leave. It had ensured I couldn't. I was trapped. Back inside, I double-checked every lock, then methodically closed and secured each blind. The RV became a metal box with me sealed inside, the darkness broken only by my flashlight beam and the faint moonlight seeping around the blind's edges. Sleep was unthinkable. I positioned myself on the small sofa with clear sightlines to all windows and the door, shotgun across my lap, back pressed against the wall to prevent anything from approaching unseen. Hours crawled by in tense vigilance. My eyelids grew heavy despite my fear, the adrenaline that had sustained me gradually depleting as midnight passed into early morning. I fought against fatigue, pinching my skin and shifting positions to maintain alertness. Around 2:30 a.m. I heard it, the now familiar sound of deliberate footsteps circling the RV. Not attempting stealth this time, but making its presence known. A psychological tactic meant to wear down resistance through sustained terror. The steps completed one circuit, then another, occasionally punctuated by the scrape of claws against metal. After the third pass, they stopped directly outside my door. I raised the shotgun, aiming at the thin barrier that suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. Something heavy leaned against the door, making the hinges creak in protest. The doorknob rattled. Not the jiggling attempt of something without dexterity, but the deliberate testing of a locked handle. Then came a sound that nearly stopped my heart. 3 distinct knocks. Not random banging, not animal scratching, but the universal human signal requesting entry. The knocking repeated, more insistent this time. "What do you want?" I called, my voice cracking with strain. Silence answered, followed by the soft slide of something moving away from the door and back toward the forest. The footsteps receded until they faded completely, leaving me alone with the thunderous pounding of my own heart. Dawn arrived with agonizing slowness, gray light gradually replacing darkness. I hadn't slept, my eyes burning from sustained vigilance, muscles aching from maintained tension. With the first genuine light of morning, I permitted myself to check outside. The clearing stood empty, peaceful in appearance, betraying nothing of the night's terror. The only evidence of my visitor was the destroyed tires and a series of those distinctive tracks circling the RV, ending at the forest's edge. I faced an inescapable reality. I needed help. With no vehicle, no working phone, and at least 15 miles of rough terrain between me and the nearest paved road, my options were limited. I could attempt to hike out, but that meant exposing myself in the forest where it clearly held the advantage. Or I could wait, hoping another traveler might pass by this remote location. The decision was made for me when I spotted dust rising on the distant access road. A vehicle was approaching. Relief flooded through me as a Forest Service truck came into view, its green paint gleaming in the morning sun. It pulled alongside my disabled RV, and a uniformed ranger stepped out, adjusting his wide-brimmed hat. "Having some trouble?" he called, surveying the slashed tires with a frown. "You could say that," I replied, the shotgun hidden just inside my door. Something held me back from immediately sharing the full story. "Woke up to find them like this." The ranger approached, crouching to examine the damage. "Never seen anything like this," he murmured, running fingers along the jagged tiers. Bear damage usually looks different. It wasn't a bear, I said firmly. He glanced up, something shifting in his expression. No. I need to report a possible missing person situation, I continued, deciding to focus on the destroyed campsite rather than my nocturnal visitor. I found an abandoned camp up the ridge yesterday. Signs of violence, a lot of blood. The ranger stood slowly, dusting off his hands. That would be the Schaefer site. The casual familiarity of his response caught me off guard. You know about it? We found their vehicle at a trailhead 2 miles south 3 days ago, he explained. Search teams have been combing the area since. You're the first person to actually locate their camp. And the blood? The destruction? The ranger's face remained professional, but something guarded entered his eyes. May I come in? I should take your statement properly. Inside the RV, he declined my offer of coffee, instead removing a small notebook from his breast pocket. Start from the beginning, he instructed. When did you arrive here? I recounted my arrival and the events leading up to discovering the destroyed campsite, carefully omitting any mention of the creature. Something about the ranger's carefully neutral expression made me hesitant to share the full story. And you didn't see anyone? Hear anything unusual? He prompted when I finished. The question hung in the air between us. A test, perhaps? Like what? I countered. The ranger closed his notebook and leaned forward, voice dropping to near whisper. Mr. Coulter, have you ever heard of the Walker? The question sent ice through my veins. Should I have? I managed, keeping my expression neutral. The ranger studied me for a long moment before continuing. There's a reason this area isn't on any tourist maps, despite its beauty. There's a reason the Forest Service doesn't maintain campsites here, despite the perfect terrain. He glanced toward the window, as though checking that we remained alone. Local tribes avoided this valley for centuries before white settlers arrived. They called it the shadow place in their language. Said it belonged to something that wasn't human, wasn't animal, but somewhere in between. The Walker, I supplied. He nodded grimly. The Guardian, the Protector, the Wendigo. It has many names, but all the stories agree on one thing. It defends its territory with extreme prejudice against those who don't belong. Like the Schaefers, I said softly. And perhaps like you, he added, his gaze intensifying. Those tire slashes aren't random vandalism, Mr. Coulter. They're a message. Get out, I whispered, remembering the words on my bathroom mirror. But don't run, the ranger added cryptically. It respects those who face it with courage, despises those who show fear. He stood abruptly, adjusting his hat. I'll call for a tow truck from town. Should be here in a few hours. Until then, I suggest you pack what you need and be ready to leave. Don't wander from your vehicle. At the door, he paused, turning back with an unreadable expression. Whatever you saw out there, Mr. Coulter, whatever you think you saw, it might be best not to include it in any official report. Some things aren't meant for government forms and public records. With that cryptic advice, he departed, the Forest Service truck raising dust as it disappeared down the access road. I stood in the doorway, watching until the vehicle vanished from sight, the ranger's words echoing in my mind. He knew. Without my saying a word, he knew what had happened here. This wasn't the first time the Walker had made its presence known, and I suspected it wouldn't be the last. The tow truck arrived 3 hours later, driven by a weather-beaten man who introduced himself simply as Mac. He worked efficiently, securing my disabled RV to the flatbed with minimal conversation beyond practical necessities. Where are we headed? He asked once the RV was loaded. Nearest town with a service garage, I replied, climbing into the truck's passenger seat with my essential belongings hastily packed in a duffel bag. Mac nodded, putting the truck in gear. That'd be Shasta City, about 30 miles south. The journey passed mostly in silence, the forest gradually giving way to more open terrain as we descended from the mountains. My mind replayed the events of the past 24 hours in continuous loop, searching for rational explanations that remained stubbornly elusive. Found you in a bad spot, Mac commented as we approached civilization, breaking the extended silence. Most folks know better than to camp up in that valley. I glanced at him, noting the deliberate casualness of his remark. The ranger mentioned something similar. Mac's weathered hands tightened on the steering wheel. Ranger McCullough's been around these parts his whole life, knows things most Forest Service folks don't. About the walker? I ventured carefully. The truck slowed slightly, Mac's eyes flicking toward me before returning to the road. Had yourself an encounter, did you? The question hung between us, an invitation to share my experience with someone who might actually believe it. I'd been mulling over how I'd explain the destroyed tires to authorities. Vandals, perhaps, or an unusually determined bear. But the prospect of speaking the truth to someone who wouldn't immediately dismiss it was tempting. I found a destroyed campsite, I began cautiously, and afterwards something followed me back to my RV. Mac nodded slowly, as though I'd merely confirmed his suspicions. The Schaefers, young couple from Oregon backpacking through, rangers found their car Tuesday. What happens now? Will they keep searching? A bitter smile creased Mac's leathery face. They'll search. Won't find anything worth finding. You mean they're dead? Means they trespassed where they weren't welcome, he corrected. Same as you, except you got a warning instead of a sentence. We crested a hill, and Shasta City came into view below, a small mountain community nestled in a valley, its buildings clustered around a main street that could have been plucked from a century earlier. The afternoon sun glinted off the windows of a church steeple at the town's center. I'll take you to Jim's garage, Mac said, navigating toward the town. He can order new tires, have you fixed up by tomorrow afternoon. I'd appreciate that. Meanwhile, Crossroads Inn has decent rooms, clean, quiet. Owner's my sister Maggie. I'll let her know you're coming. We pulled into a garage at the edge of town where a middle-aged man in oil-stained coveralls emerged from beneath a lifted pickup truck. Jim, presumably. He exchanged nods with Mac, then surveyed my damaged RV with professional interest. Bear? He asked simply. Something like that, I replied. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he asked no further questions. Can have you back on the road tomorrow if the tires arrive on the morning delivery. Cost you about $800 for the set, plus labor. I nodded agreement, then settled the towing fee with Mac, who offered me a ride to the Crossroads Inn before I could ask. The inn proved to be a 2-story Victorian painted in fading yellow, with a wide porch sporting several rocking chairs. The interior smelled of pine cleaner and cinnamon, the lobby furnished with antiques that appeared both authentically old and well-maintained. Maggie, a silver-haired woman with Mac's same weather-beaten complexion, greeted me from behind a polished reception desk. Mr. Coulter, she said, Mac having apparently called ahead. Room 7's ready for you, top of the stairs, end of the hall. I thanked her, reaching for my wallet. We'll settle up when you check out, she said, waving away the gesture. Dinner's served in the dining room from 6 to 8. Just hamburgers tonight, I'm afraid. Sounds perfect, I assured her, suddenly aware of my hunger. I hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch, fear having suppressed appetite until now. Room 7 was small but immaculate, featuring a brass bed, oak dresser, and small writing desk positioned beneath a window overlooking the town's main street. I showered away 24 hours of terror sweat, changed into clean clothes, and collapsed onto the bed. Despite my exhaustion, sleep remained elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those amber orbs staring from the forest edge, felt the presence circling my RV, heard those deliberate knocks requesting entry. The events had carved themselves into my psyche with the permanence of scars. At 6:30, I made my way downstairs to the small dining room where 3 other guests, an elderly couple and a solo businessman, occupied widely spaced tables. I selected one near the window, where fading daylight cast long shadows across the town's quiet street. Maggie herself brought my burger, along with a locally brewed beer I hadn't ordered. On the house, she explained, setting it before me. Mac mentioned you had a rough couple days up in the valley. I thanked her, taking a grateful sip. Does everyone in town know where I was camping? She settled into the chair opposite mine, an unexpected familiarity that nevertheless felt welcome rather than intrusive. Word travels, especially when it involves that particular location. I studied her face, finding the same knowing look I'd seen in Ranger McCullough's eyes. I get the impression I'm not the first person to come down from there with unusual experiences. You're not even the first this summer, she confirmed, voice lowered though the nearest diners sat well out of earshot. Family from Sacramento in June, solo hiker in early July, now you... And the Schaefers, I added grimly. Something flickered across her features. Sorrow, perhaps, or resignation. The Schaefers crossed a line others didn't. What line? Maggie glanced toward the window, where darkness had almost completely displaced daylight. There's a gathering in the back room at 9, locals mostly. But given what you've seen, you might want to join us. With that cryptic invitation, she rose and returned to her duties, leaving me to contemplate my burger and the implications of her words. The town knew something, collectively held knowledge about whatever roamed the forest above them. Knowledge they were apparently willing to share. I spent the intervening hours in my room, transcribing the events of the past days into my journal while they remained fresh in memory. The familiar activity helped organize my thoughts, transforming chaotic experience into ordered narrative. At precisely 9 o'clock, I descended the stairs to find Maggie waiting in the lobby. Without speaking, she led me through the dining room, now empty of other guests, and through a door marked private at the rear. Beyond lay a wood-paneled room that might once have been a parlor, now furnished with mismatched chairs arranged in a rough circle. Most were already occupied. I recognized Mac and Jim from the garage, along with perhaps 10 others of varying ages. Ranger McCulloch nodded to me from across the room. "Everyone," Maggie announced. "This is Dean Coulter. He had an encounter up in Shadow Valley yesterday." The collective gaze of the room settled on me with uncomfortable intensity. I shifted under their scrutiny, feeling like a specimen under examination. "Have a seat, Mr. Coulter," offered an elderly man, gesturing to an empty chair beside him. "I'm Dr. Reeves, retired now. Been in Shasta City 43 years. I took the offered seat, noting that the circle had fallen silent, clearly waiting for me to speak. "I'm not entirely sure why I'm here," I admitted. "Tell us what you saw," Ranger McCulloch prompted gently. "Everything, without editing or rationalizing." So I did. I recounted the events chronologically, beginning with the unnatural silence and ending with the slashed tires and written warning. As I spoke, I watched their faces, searching for signs of disbelief or judgment, finding none. These people were listening with the solemn attention of those who already knew my story's shape, if not its specific details. When I finished, silence hung in the room for several long moments. "It let you go," Dr. Reeves finally said, his tone suggesting this detail carried particular significance. "It could have harmed you at multiple points, yet chose warning instead." The Schaefers weren't so fortunate, I noted. Several faces grimaced and Ranger McCulloch cleared his throat. The Schaefers made a critical error. According to their hiking permit, they intended to camp 3 nights. We found evidence at their site that they'd been hunting. "Hunting?" I echoed, confused by the apparent non sequitur. "Killed a deer," Jim from the garage elaborated. "We found the remains about 50 yards from their camp, improperly field-dressed, parts wasted. Took only the backstraps and tenderloins, left the rest to rot." The significance slowly dawned on me. "You're saying this Walker punished them for wasteful hunting?" "The old tribes believed the Walker was a guardian," explained a middle-aged woman I hadn't been introduced to, "not just of territory, but of balance. It protected the forest from those who took without respect, who killed without necessity. A spirit of conservation, centuries before the concept existed in Western thought," Dr. Reeves added. "You all speak about this thing like it's real," I said carefully. "Like it's an established fact, not legend or myth." Ranger McCulloch leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Shasta City has existed in the shadow of the mountain for over 150 years, Mr. Coulter. In that time, we've accumulated certain local knowledge that doesn't find its way into tourist brochures or government reports." "What exactly are you saying?" "We're saying," Maggie interjected, "that what you encountered has been part of these mountains since before human memory. The tribes knew it, the settlers learned about it, and we've reached an understanding with it." "An understanding?" "Respect the forest," Jim summarized bluntly. "Don't overhunt, don't overharvest, don't disturb certain areas, like Shadow Valley, where you were camping. In return, it leaves the town alone." I glanced around the circle, searching for any sign that this was an elaborate hoax or shared delusion. I found none. These were ordinary, seemingly rational people, collectively acknowledging an extraordinary reality. "Why tell me this?" I asked finally. "Why bring an outsider into your secret?" Dr. Reeves smiled thinly. "Because you're marked now. You've seen it, and it's seen you. That creates a connection that doesn't simply disappear when you drive away tomorrow." Cold apprehension crawled up my spine. What does that mean? It means, Ranger McCullough said carefully, that you should be prepared for the possibility that your encounter wasn't a random event or your final interaction with the walker. You're saying it might follow me, beyond these mountains. Several members of the circle exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Not exactly, Maggie replied after a moment. But those who encounter it often find themselves drawn back. Dreams, compulsions, coincidences that lead them to return to this area. Like it gets inside your head, Mac added, tapping his temple significantly. Or like it marks your soul, countered Dr. Reeves. The indigenous peoples believed seeing the walker changed a person fundamentally, opened their eyes to aspects of reality others couldn't perceive. I thought of those intelligent amber eyes studying me in the forest clearing, the deliberate knocking at my door, the written warning in my bathroom mirror. Whatever this entity was, it possessed awareness and intention beyond animal instinct. What do I do? I asked simply. Tomorrow you'll get your RV fixed and drive away, Ranger McCullough advised. Continue your travels, live your life, but carry what you've learned about respect and balance with you. And if I experience these compulsions to return? Dr. Reeves reached into his pocket, extracting a business card that he handed to me. My number. If you need guidance, or simply someone who won't think you're hallucinating when you describe your experiences. The gathering concluded shortly thereafter, dispersing with handshakes and somber nods. I returned to my room with more questions than answers, though a strange sense of validation had replaced my earlier isolation. Whatever I'd encountered, these people accepted its reality without question. I slept fitfully that night, dreaming of amber eyes watching from forest shadows and clawed hands reaching for my door. Morning arrived with merciful normality, sunlight streaming through lace curtains, the distant sounds of Main Street coming to life, the aroma of coffee wafting from the inn's dining room. For a blissful moment, the events of the previous days seemed like nothing more than an elaborate nightmare. Then I noticed the mud. A trail of dried forest soil marked the hardwood floor, leading from my door to the window overlooking Main Street. The window I'd closed and locked before retiring. Now it stood open, the curtains shifting gently in the morning breeze. Someone, something, had been in my room while I slept. I approached the windowsill with cautious steps, examining the dried mud. Within one larger smear, I could make out the distinct impression of elongated toes with claw marks extending beyond them. The same tracks I'd seen circling my RV. My heart hammered against my ribs as I followed the mud trail backward to my door, confirming it remained locked from the inside. Whatever had visited had bypassed normal entry points, scaling the exterior wall to an upper-story window with apparent ease. Yet nothing in my room had been disturbed. My belongings remained untouched, my journal open on the desk exactly as I'd left it. Not a threat then, but a message. I can reach you anywhere. I showered and dressed with mechanical movements, my mind racing to process this latest development. The gathering last night had mentioned a connection, a marking that transcended physical distance. I'd interpreted their warnings as psychological, perhaps metaphorical. This mud on my floor suggested something far more literal. Downstairs, the dining room hosted several guests enjoying breakfast. I selected a table facing the entrance, positioning myself to observe all entryways, a habit that would persist long after the events of that August. Maggie approached with coffee, her practiced innkeeper's smile faltering as she registered my expression. "Rough night?" she inquired, filling my cup. "You could say that," I replied, lowering my voice. "I had a visitor." Her hand stilled, coffee pot hovering above my cup. "What kind of visitor?" "The kind that leaves muddy footprints from a second-story window." Maggie's composure slipped momentarily, genuine alarm crossing her features before she controlled it. "Eat your breakfast," she advised quietly. "Then come find me in the office." I forced down eggs and toast that tasted like cardboard, keeping my attention divided between my plate and the room's entrances. No one else seemed to notice anything amiss. Tourists planning their day, a businessman reviewing documents over coffee, an elderly couple discussing their grandchildren. Normal life continuing around me while my reality had fundamentally shifted. Maggie waited in a small office behind the reception desk, door open in clear invitation. I entered, closing it behind me. She gestured to a chair opposite her cluttered desk. "Tell me exactly what you found," she requested without preamble. I described the mud trail and open window, watching her face grow increasingly grave as I spoke. "This is unusual," she admitted when I finished. "The walker rarely follows people into town. It respects the boundaries we've established over generations." "Yet it came to my room," I pointed out. "Specifically my room, bypassing other guests." Maggie nodded slowly, her expression contemplative. "You said it let you go in the forest, even after you photographed the Schaefer's site. Now this, it's showing particular interest in you. Why? I'm nobody special." "Perhaps that's for the walker to determine, not us." She opened a drawer, removing a small cloth pouch that she placed on the desk between us. "Local tribe medicine. Protection and clarity. Keep it with you." I accepted the pouch with murmured thanks, more out of politeness than conviction in its efficacy. "Your RV should be ready by noon," she continued. "When you leave, head south. Don't circle back north, even if that was your original plan. Create distance." "And then what?" I asked, an edge entering my voice. "Keep running? Always look over my shoulder? Change my entire life because some creature has taken an interest in me?" Maggie's weathered face softened with something like compassion. "The walker isn't malevolent, Mr. Coulter. It's ancient, powerful, and operates by rules we barely comprehend. But it's not evil. If it wanted to harm you, we wouldn't be having this conversation." "Then what does it want?" "Perhaps just to be acknowledged, remembered." She gestured toward my jacket pocket where my journal created a visible outline. "You keep a record of your travels, yes? Include this encounter. Don't sanitize it or rationalize it away." The request aligned with my existing intentions. I'd already documented everything in meticulous detail, compelled by some inner drive to preserve the experience accurately. "Will that be enough?" I asked. Maggie's smile held neither humor nor certainty. "We'll see." I spent the remaining morning hours exploring Shasta City, more to occupy my mind than from genuine tourist interest. The small mountain community featured the expected craft shops and outdoor outfitters, along with a modest museum dedicated to local history and mining heritage. In the museum's furthest room, separate from the mining exhibits and pioneer artifacts, I discovered a small collection of indigenous items: baskets, arrowheads, ceremonial objects, the standard assortment found in regional museums. What caught my attention, however, was a faded sketch framed on the back wall. Rendered in what appeared to be charcoal on animal hide, it depicted a tall, bipedal figure with elongated limbs and a suggestion of dense fur. Its proportions matched precisely what I'd seen in the forest clearing. The small identifying placard offered minimal information. Guardian figure attributed to Wintu tribe, circa 1851. Donated by Reeves family, 1974. Dr. Reeves's family had contributed this artifact. The connection seemed significant, though its exact meaning remained elusive. A small handwritten journal lay in a glass case beneath the sketch, open to a page containing spidery script. I leaned closer to read. June 17th, 1851. The natives speak of a forest guardian that walks on two legs like a man but is not a man. They leave offerings at certain trees and will not enter the high valley even when game is plentiful there. When pressed, our guide would say only that those who show respect are left in peace, while those who despoil the land receive judgment. Simmons dismisses these stories as superstitious nonsense designed to keep settlers from prime hunting grounds. I am not so certain. Last night, something circled our camp that left tracks unlike any bear or mountain lion I have encountered. The native's warning may merit greater consideration than my colleagues allow. The account, though brief, confirmed the continuity of the walker's presence in these mountains, from indigenous knowledge through early settlement to the present day. This wasn't a recent phenomenon or contemporary legend, but a persistent reality documented across generations. At noon, I retrieved my repaired RV from Jim's garage, the 4 new tires incongruously pristine against the vehicle's travel-worn exterior. Jim provided minimal conversation during our transaction, though his eyes held the same knowing look I'd encountered in the gathering the previous night. "Heading south?" he asked as he handed over the invoice. "That's the plan," I confirmed, Maggie's advice still fresh in mind. He nodded approval. "Smart. Good travels, Mr. Coulter." I stopped at the inn to settle my bill and collect my belongings. Maggie waited behind the reception desk, my room key already in hand. "I took the liberty of cleaning up the mud," she said quietly as she processed my credit card. Thought you might prefer that. I thanked her, oddly grateful for this small consideration. The physical evidence had served its purpose. I needed no further reminder of my nocturnal visitor. Remember what we discussed, she added, returning my card. South, not north, and the pouch stays with you. The cloth pouch now resided in my jacket pocket alongside my journal, its weight negligible, yet somehow comforting. I wasn't a superstitious man by nature, but recent events had expanded my definition of possible reality. By 1 o'clock, I had left Shasta City behind, the RV humming smoothly along Highway 89 southbound. Each mile increased the distance between myself and Shadow Valley, yet brought no corresponding sense of safety or resolution. The dashboard clock read 3:17 p.m. when I noticed the first crow. It perched on a roadside fence post, larger than typical for the species, its glossy black feathers reflecting sunlight like polished obsidian. As I passed, it launched into flight, following parallel to my course before settling on another post further ahead. When I passed this second perch, the process repeated. The bird seemed to be pacing me, maintaining position just ahead of my vehicle regardless of speed. At a roadside rest area 30 miles south of Shasta City, I pulled over, needing a break from both driving and the unsettling avian escort. The crow landed on my RV's roof with an audible thump, its claws scraping against metal as it positioned itself directly above the driver's seat. I remained inside, watching through the windshield as a second crow joined the first, then a third. Within minutes, 7 identical birds perched along my roof edge, their collective gaze directed toward me with unnerving focus. Ravens were intelligent birds, known for problem-solving and recognizing human faces. But this behavior transcended normal avian capabilities. This was surveillance, coordinated and purposeful. I started the engine, pulling back onto the highway with more haste than caution. The birds took flight as one, maintaining formation above and beside the RV like a feathered honor guard. At the junction where Highway 89 met Interstate 5, the decision point between continued southbound travel or the westward turn that would eventually lead to my intended destination of Olympic National Park, the ravens dispersed suddenly. One moment they flanked my vehicle. The next, they veered eastward as a unified group, disappearing toward the distant mountains. Their message seemed clear. I had chosen correctly, south, not north, away from Shadow Valley and its guardian. I continued driving until sunset, finally stopping at a commercial RV park outside Redding, the polar opposite of my remote forest clearing, with hookups, facilities, and neighboring campers on all sides. The normalcy felt both reassuring and somehow hollow, as though I'd retreated from something essential in exchange for safety. Sleep came easier than expected, exhaustion finally overriding hypervigilance. I dreamed of forest paths and amber eyes watching from shadows, but the nightmares held no terror, only a strange sense of communion. I woke at dawn, my decision already made with the clarity that sometimes accompanies early morning consciousness. I would not continue south or west. I would not run from what had marked me. I would return to Shasta City, to Dr. Reeves, to the gathering of those who understood. Not immediately, but eventually, when the pull became too insistent to ignore. The walker had entered my reality, altering it in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. Fighting that alteration seemed not only futile but somehow inappropriate, like resisting a natural process necessary for growth. As I prepared coffee in the RV's small kitchenette, I noticed something on the countertop that hadn't been there the previous night. A small, perfectly formed feather, glossy black with hints of blue iridescence. A crow's feather. I added it to the cloth pouch Maggie had given me, a personal talisman to complement the indigenous medicine. Together, they represented my new reality. One foot in the rational world I'd always known, one in the shadow realm where ancient guardians still walked forest paths and passed judgment on human behavior. Outside, the day began with ordinary sounds. RVs preparing for departure, children laughing, birds calling. Normal life continuing around me while within, I processed my new understanding of a world larger and stranger than I'd previously believed. I would drive south today, respecting the guidance I'd received. But someday, perhaps when summer returned to the mountains, I would find myself drawn back to that unmarked turn off Highway 97, to the valley locals called Shadow, to the entity waiting there. Not with fear, but with the respect worthy of something ancient and powerful. Something that had chosen to warn rather than harm. Something that had, for reasons I might never fully understand, marked me as worthy of its attention. Dean Coulter, professional truck driver, divorced, ordinary in all observable aspects, except for this one extraordinary experience that would color every day that followed. I opened my journal and began to write, recording these final thoughts before continuing my journey. The last entry for this particular chapter of my life, though certainly not the final word on my relationship with the walker. Some encounters change us fundamentally, opening our eyes to aspects of reality previously invisible. We can deny these changes, fight against expanded awareness, retreat to comfortable ignorance, or we can accept the invitation to a larger world, with all its wonder and terror inseparably entwined. I chose the latter, and somewhere in the forests of Northern California, ancient eyes watched, waiting for my eventual return. Each year on August 15th, I perform a small private ritual. I burn sage in remembrance, place a single black feather on my windowsill, and read the journal entries from those fateful days in 2002. Not from fear, but from respect for the connection that remains unbroken across time and distance. The walker taught me that our world contains mysteries beyond scientific explanation or rational understanding. That lesson humbles me still. Sometimes in dreams, I walk forest paths beneath towering pines, and something keeps pace just beyond sight. Not threatening, but accompanying. Guardian and guide both. I will return to Shadow Valley eventually. The compulsion grows stronger with each passing year. When I do, I will go not as a trespasser, but as one who understands the covenant between human and guardian, between modern consciousness and ancient power. Until then, I travel with open eyes, aware that beneath the surface of ordinary reality swim deeper currents of mystery. And I'm grateful for the glimpse I was permitted, however terrifying it seemed at the time. Some doors, once opened, never fully close again.